Stefano, thanks for coming, man.
No, thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Katarina Schultz said you're like one of the guys to talk to when it comes to intel on the ground in Mexico with the cartels.
I mean, Katarina's a great friend, both of viewers of mine. You know, she's awesome. So shout out, Katarina. Thank you so much. I know she was the one who put us in touch. So I really appreciate it. But yeah, I mean, I've been focusing on Mexican cartels. It started out as a hobby. And
a hobby.
It was,
How do you have a hobby of like focusing on the cartels? Just like one day.
You know, all right. So that's a good question, right? So how did this happen? Well, you know, I was, former Army, and while I was active duty still, I did a lot. I deployed to Jordan during, Operation Inherent Resolve, which was the whole counter ISIS fight, right? And when I was in Jordan, and even before that, when I was in college, I really liked back then Twitter, like the growing of this open source intelligence community, right? Like, oh my God, like these guys are really good at what they do. And I even saw during my time when I was deployed, like, oh my God, Twitter, there's a lot of information that gets pushed there that is extremely that a lot of us use.
Right.
And so I thought to myself one day, I was in active duty, and I realized that on the English speaking side, because, I'm a first generation American. My mom was born in Mexico. My dad was born in Argentina. So I speak fluent Spanish. I lived in Spain. And when
you had native Argentinian?
Yeah, my dad was,
Awesome.
He was born and raised, and then he moved like in his 20s to Italy. Grandfather was Italian, all right?
Okay,
I know that you're,
you got to ask these questions
Italian.
post-1945. I'm just saying,
No, he moved. I think my grandfather moved there in 1910 when he was a kid. So, but I have to put that there.
All right, it passes through. That's fine.
But and my mom from Mexico, and I had family in Mexico, and so I started to realize that even before I really got involved in like kind of the cartel dynamics, that all these OSINT accounts on Twitter back in the day were very focused on Russia, Ukraine, right? They were focused on the Middle East. There was some that focused on Africa, but for some reason, like South America and Mexico specifically was ignored from the English-speaking side. Right. And it's crazy because on the Mexican Twitter and in Mexican social media, there's a huge swath of these cartel observers and cartel, like you would call cartel OSINT accounts like back in the day, right? Massive and amazing information. It just seemed like really weird. Like, why isn't that on the English side? And so when I was on active duty, I did kind of two missions. I was a battalion S2, which is like the intelligence officer. I did 4 weeks. I went to Mexico to train the Mexican army. It was me.
Train the Mexican army?
Yeah, we trained the Mexican military police before the National Guard was created. It was the Mexican military police. I was with a military police unit in El Paso, the 93rd MP Battalion.
Hey guys, 3 quick things. Number 1, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. It's a huge, huge help. Number 2, if you'd like to join my Patreon for early uncensored releases of the full episodes, you can join via the link in my description or in the pinned comment below. And number 3, if you'd like to join my clipping community for a chance to make content from the show and make money, you can join via the Discord link in my description below.
And they sent us 4 weeks to Mexico to train them. It was me, another officer, and 2 NCOs, non-commissioned officers. Best army experience I ever had. I mean,
really?
Oh my God.
You weren't worried about them working for the cartel?
No. So we went to Mexico City, and then it's like outside. So it was during the week we would be in this Mexican military base, and in the weekend they would drive us to the hotel in like prime Mexico City. In the weekends we would do whatever we want. I had family there, so they would pick me up. I mean, it was great, but interacting with the Mexican military police was amazing. I mean, these guys, right? Like if like I said, I was deployed to Jordan. A lot of us in the army are very used to working with like the Middle Eastern militaries. I did another mission in Niger, for example, also 5 weeks. And you kind of like, there's moments where you start, like you pull your hair. You're like, why, the professionalism isn't there, or they don't get it, or they're more in the military because they want the title rather than, let's say, the service. You know what I mean? Like there's
Absolutely.
a lot of that. And you could talk to anybody who said that. But when you go to Mexico, no, these guys are there because, love of country. Right? They are passionate about it, and they're a professional force. And so training them was great because it was like, oh, I get to train a professional force, which, by the way, could teach us some things, right? Like their ability to do, for example, like in the military, the MPs and the US MPs, technically it's like we're supposed to do like riot control, right? That's like one of the mission sets that they're supposed to do. The Mexican military police, they would back then, before the National Guard, they would also do riot control. But like when we were there, we realized, man, these guys do riot control way better than us. Like, what are we what are we going to teach them?
Yeah.
Because they do it all the time. I remember we were in the base and there was a moment in the, they had an exercise where they had like literally soldiers acting as protesters, right? It was an exercise. And then they had the unit that was getting like certified, right? And so they did this whole exercise and it was like the evaluator said, and go. It was insanity. I mean, the guys who were acting as the protest did not hold back. They fired firecrackers at them, rocks, sticks. They were
nice.
There was a moment, I kid you not, we saw from the distance, they grabbed one of the guys on the riot control. He was in the line, pulled him out. And then the protesters managed to push the MPs back. And then the guys who had the soldiers were beating him up.
Oh, for real?
Oh, dude, they were. So then the MPs had to come in with the van, with the water hose and just spray everybody. Fire. Like they did not hold back. And we had a week of training. I remember this moment. We had like in our training material was like, you know, riot control for a week. And when we saw this, I remember we just looked at each other and we just crossed that whole off for the week. We're like, okay, we're not doing this. Like, they don't need, I even put a note like, hey, if you want training, they can train us how to do this because they don't. And then it was like they called it end and everybody just stood up. Hey, that was great, guys. We're really good. All right. Compa, muy bien, todo. And then they just left. Like nothing.
Yeah, there's like a dead guy on the ground.
He just stood up, bruises. He didn't care. But, you know, that's the thing. They were extremely professional and it was great experience.
That's professional?
Yeah. Hey, man.
That's like WWE professional.
Well, what is riot control? You know, you had a lot of cops here. You tell them, get one that's riot control. Let's see what they say.
Yeah.
Let's see the Knicks win New York in the finals, and then let's
yeah, yeah. You haven't been to Philly apparently.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. But you know, so that deployment to Mexico, and then I did a border mission during the first Trump administration. The first time he sent guys to the borders. Those two things kind of piqued my interest.
All right, wait a minute. What did a border mission look like while you're in the army?
Yeah.
And an active president sends you, I assume, to support border patrol, or
so
was it totally separate?
So it was. We went there in 2018. It was literally the first time he did this right before the midterm elections. It was October, November of 2018 that he sends us. And the reason why they did that was because that caravan from Guatemala was going up through Mexico.
Oh, I remember that.
Exactly. And
It's
so
a big caravan.
So what they did was our unit and the MPs they sent. Because we kind of had like the Northcom mission. We were like the QRF. It's called Homeland Defense. And it's funny when they briefed us, like, you guys don't do border security. That's called DISCA. It's a whole term. And like, you guys don't do border defense. Don't worry about border defense. And the only mission we ever did was border defense. It's like, oh my God, okay, here we go. So what they did was they sent some of our units to like Southeast Texas, Brownsville, like Laredo, that area. And then our battalion, they sent to San Diego. And then we were under the Marine Corps, the SP MAGTF.
Okay.
So we were part of that. And I remember in the briefing when the caravan, there was really two routes they could take. They could take the quickest route, which was through basically hugging almost like the Caribbean coast. Mm. And then they would head up to Brownsville, Texas. The problem there, though, that was the most dangerous. Because back then the Gulf Cartel Civil War was terrible. And they were specifically targeting migrants because it was easy money for them, especially extortion. Yeah. Or they could take the long route, which back then was the safest route, which was San Diego. And that's where we, were sent in, and that's where the caravan actually, for the most part, ended up was in San Diego. And to your point, we were like
standing there waiting.
We were just waiting. The Border Patrol was the lead, and then we would build concertina wire over the border wall, and the Marines would build it, and us as I was the intel officer. I wasn't doing that, but the MPs would protect the Marines, who were the engineers that were building the concertina wire, and they would do that all across the border. Right, we had that in California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, everywhere. But what was funny was even back then, and they still do this. The problem of concertina wire is you can't just set it up and then just leave. That's not its design. So even if you put it on top of the border wall, so what they would do is, people in Mexico would go to the border wall, see the concertina, they would steal it. Oh. And then they would sell it in Mexico.
That's not great.
And so it was it was just this nonstop, thing. Now, as an intel officer, you have to be there's very strict laws in place because of the whole Vietnam War and Cold War. You can't collect on Americans and you can't do anything in the U.S.
Well, they tell you can't.
Oh, well, I can tell you, that was a severe, I'm telling you,
I'm glad you followed the rules.
I followed it 1,000,000%. Actually, like,
good for you.
So it would, we would have soldiers come up to us, like, hey, this person, was harassing us or taking pictures or stuff like that. Just reporting as soldiers do. Hey, this happened. And my first question is, does this happen on the U.S. side or the Mexican side? It was like, U.S. side. I was like, all right, don't talk to me. I have to assume that's a U.S. person. That's called U.S. I cannot be involved with that. I can't get an email about that. I can't talk. You have to talk to law enforcement or other elements within the army. You can't tell that to an MI. My whole focus was south of the border. So the caravan,
right.
Anything that happened, so that was fair game for me. But anything north, absolutely not. So they're very strict about that, like extremely strict. I know most people might not believe that.
Well, it's good they're strict in one place.
A lot of places.
Read this FISA shit. They're not too strict in other places. But, I obviously that's also literally a geographical jurisdiction in and of itself because you're at the point of the border and you're watching this and it's like, well, that happened there. That didn't happen there. So it makes it a little easier than, I guess, stuff when you're looking at wiretaps or if someone's flying with a multinational company somewhere and things like that. That's where it gets a little weird. But how long were you there when
I think 6 weeks. It was like right before I was terminated. I was going to leave. Actually, I was going to what's called ETS, like get out of active duty. I actually had to extend it because of this to the border because they didn't have a replacement for me to cover down. But it was like 6 weeks. So when I did that, between that and the Mexico mission that I went there, that happened both in 2018. That's when I decided, let me try to cover Mexican cartels. And
like as a journalist?
Well, as a hobby, I guess, I don't like calling myself an OSINT account. I don't consider myself an OSINT account. People might call me that. I think OSINT is a different type of category that is more relevant. Like if I track, for example, cartel members on social media, their messaging groups, their all that, and I used to do this all the way back in 2021, like there's some OSINT aspect of that, but not really.
I get it. Your pronouns are they, them. I understand.
That's good. But it started out just as a hobby that then became much more professional now. Actually, that whole reasoning is why now, I'm a co-founder in our company, Artorias. It's an open source intelligence company that uses AI to collect and analyze and alert information. And as that all happened because of my account on Twitter, All Source News, because the group of people I met, we kind of created this company. Now we have, for example, for the consumer, SitRep, it's a global OSINT app that you can download and you can see what it actually entails, because we think that's the future. As internet explodes and kind of grows around the world, AI is primed to be able to analyze large data sets and information. Sure. And so that's why we use it also to track Mexican cartels and kind of the activities that they do. And
modern razors have quietly taught people to press harder than they should. Most people don't choose to do this, they're conditioned to. When blades are allowed to move through springs or flexible mounts, they feel unstable against hair. That instability registers as tugging or inconsistency. To counter it, people instinctively apply more pressure to make the razor feel firm against the skin. That pressure reduces some blade movement, but it also increases friction between the razor and the skin. Thus, pressure becomes a learned behavior. Razors are designed to tolerate it, lubrication strips soften its effects, balms soothe the aftermath. But pressure isn't a feature. It's compensation. The system trains people to apply force in order to stabilize a design that isn't stable on its own. This is where my friends at Henson Shaving come in. Henson razors are designed so pressure isn't required. By holding the blade stable and controlling its geometry precisely, the razor cuts hair efficiently without needing much force. When the blade is stable, light contact is enough, and pressure stops being part of the equation. Right now, when you use our link, you'll get a free 100 pack of blades with your razor purchase. That's basically 2 years of shaving for free. Just head to hensonshaving.com/Julian to grab the deal. That link is in my description below. Once again, that's hensonshaving.com/Julian. Link in description to get a free 100 pack of blades with your razor purchase. I got a lot of questions.
By all means.
Before we get there though, so you started like as a hobby exploring cartels while you're still in the army. So you didn't.
Well, I was technically, no, by then I was in the reserves. I was an active, I was in the reserves and then I was a contractor, but for the government.
Okay.
But I was a reserve, yeah.
So when you're a reserve / a contractor, you were allowed to start this account. and
I didn't,
Didn't ask. Okay. Apologize later. Didn't ask permission. It all worked out.
All my things that I did with the government had nothing to do with Mexican cartels. Like that's one thing I did. Like my focus as a contractor was I actually focused on like our adversaries, their ballistic missile programs, cruise missiles and drones, specifically how they would employ them in conflict with a special emphasis on Iran. So like the Iranian, yeah, right. February was very interesting for me this year, both Cartel.
Let's take that detour real quick.
So yeah, that was my focus for 6 years as a contractor, was that system, because I worked for an air defense unit. And so I would build, like when those units had, before they deployed, they had to get a training exercise to like certify they could deploy. So I was like building all the exercises and I would build the enemy, the ballistic missile force, for them to train and fight against and do that.
All right. So let's totally take this detour, because you were literally working in the belly of the beast of analyzing what Iran may have or doesn't have. First of all, what types of intelligence sources from the contracting army side are you getting to be able to determine what weaponry they actually have?
I mean, that's all government intelligence. I mean, there is obviously OSINT involved in that, but for the most part, anything like that, we're talking now like classified government type of stuff, that kind of from a multi-agency. And Iran is always going to be one of the priorities for the intelligence community. And so that's kind of where the vast majority of the information we use. And then you analyze not only, one of the things I would say is a lot of times, this might be a little bit too specific. I felt like a lot of people would focus more on like, this missile can do X, Y, and Z. It can fly this long. It can maybe do this little thing. It was very much centered on the missile system. And for me and what we were doing, like that really is not as important for us.
Why not?
Because what we're training is how you're going to respond to them using, let's say, hundreds of missiles. So like in the end of the day, one individual missile system and how they operate and all that would be more for, let's say, the guys who are working the Patriots and say, like, hey, there's this new system in place. How can we defeat this one missile system? My focus more was let's just say all out war broke out. How are these people going to employ hundreds of missiles in a war? And how and that was something that, the military and the army, because of the global war on terror, kind of like, and coin, and you hear this a lot, like Russia, Ukraine, and all that, like a lot of that was kind of forgotten, or not forgotten, not emphasized enough. And so now, obviously now in February 2026, with everything happening and the US-Iran war, that's kind of recentered itself and become a major focus, because now we get to see it for really the first time a country employ, or even in 2025 with the Israel-Iran 12-day war, that's when we really saw mass quantity of ballistic missiles launched in the first time in history. And in many aspects, a lot of countries are developing those capabilities to employ it. And we've seen it with Russia and Ukraine as well, a China-Taiwan scenario as well. And so that's more where I wanted to focus on, because when I was back in, it was more like that individual system and what they can do, rather than the holistic picture from a doctrinal perspective, how they would fight.
Okay. So when you were looking at it though, back in 2018, 2019, 2020?
2019 till I guess like 2024.
Okay. Yeah. So not that long before the 12-day war. I guess the first question is, what kind of weaponry capabilities did Iran have relative to what other countries, even in the region, have right there?
I mean, Iran has the largest ballistic missile force in the Middle East, right? I mean, that is a known fact. And they really prioritize that ballistic missile force. And one of the things that they did a lot was, they got from like the Soviet and all that and the ballistic missiles, and they really understand and realize, look, we're not going to develop the most advanced fighter jet. We're not going to develop the most advanced naval vessel. So the way that we can have a deterrent and even an offensive capability of strike back is, one, through the ballistic missile program, and then it expanded into their drone program, especially the one-way attack drones. So now, like for example, the Shahed 136 they gave it to the Russians, and the Russian called it the Drone 2. That's a drone that very not sophisticated at all, but very effective at what it's designed to do, which is go and do, pinpoint and go and conduct strikes utilizing a drone. And so, that's the one.
Has it up. The HESA Shahed 136.
Yeah. So the HESA is the kind of the maker, right? That's like our Lockheed Martin and stuff like that. But that would be the one, the Shahed 136. And then the Russians, their equivalent is called the Drone 2. and they used it extensively in Ukraine. And it's kind of, and the Russians kind of took, the Iranians taught the Russians about these, like a lot of the ballistic missiles specifically, and the drones and how to employ that, right? Because the Iranians were really developing these capabilities for years and years, decades. And they kind of became almost like the subject matter experts in these capabilities because they understood this is how we can deter or defeat the United States or Saudi Arabia, et cetera. And if anything, other countries have taken notice and kind of followed a similar path in that to do that. But yes, so that's why when all this happened, but I would kind of push back heavily in some of the reporting, like, oh, how did we not know about this? Did we do? I would.
They knew.
So I'm going to quote General Votel, who was one of the former U.S. Central Command commanders, and General McKenzie, who was also a former CENTCOM commander. And both on the media both said, no, we knew about this. Like, that is not up for debate. Like, we knew about this. We've done this. We understand it, both from the naval blockade, from the drones, from the ballistic missiles. And I think the problem is there is a misunderstanding on just what I really focused on was, again, I was a low-level analyst in the huge pyramid of U.S. Central Command. Like, I was at the bottom of the food chain there specifically to train guys and these kind of capabilities within very military exercise and simulated exercises, right? To meet training objectives. But I think people mistake and say, oh, it's almost like, oh, I didn't know they had this capability, so that means the U.S. government didn't know. And because Iran did X, Y, Z, well, nobody could have suspected they were going to bomb Dubai. Well, yes.
What the fuck you expect them to do?
Exactly. What are you talking about? Yes. Yeah. Right. But then there's a misunderstanding of, okay, well then how the UAE fights, Saudi Arabia fights, the U.S. fights, and all the things that happen behind the scenes, and people try to oversimplify that response. And I think that's a fundamental issue where a lot of that reporting kind of gets erroneous and wrong. Because when I, was kind of seeing things develop, I was like, oh yeah, we kind of knew, that's exactly what they were going to do. And this is how the U.S. is going to have to respond to that, et cetera. So I think it's when not that many people really focus so much on the ballistic missile. That's when I realized, even in the think tank world, right? And most of the people outside of the news organization, they're going to get their analysis from think tanks. It became pretty clear that it wasn't a major focus for the majority of media organizations and think tank. And I think that's kind of like, I don't want to say contaminated, but kind of misinterpreted what is actually going on and how the U.S. military plans to respond. Because again, if you have two CENTCOM commanders said, we knew about this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, X account on Twitter, don't argue that you know more than two former CENTCOM commanders who lived this for years.
Sure. So you weren't looking, though, at the nuclear program or anything like that. You were strictly on the ballistic side, and then
the drones, the cruise missiles.
The drones and the cruise missiles.
And so, think of it like this. Our job was, think of a scenario, because we had to train these guys, and not only Iran, but anywhere. And the other way that the Army trains a lot specifically are joint exercises if it's multiple, like Army, Air Force, Navy. So you can have it like a specific threat template, or you make up a country. So there's a whole made up universe in the Army. Like, you can actually Google it. It's called DATE. So if you Google DATE Army, they have these whole made up countries, right? They have Denovia, Ariana.
Wasn't that in the movie fucking Princess Bride?
Yeah, that's it.
That was Shinovia. That's right.
So that's Date World, right? So they literally, and these are great guys. Like, when I was in the Army, when I was a contractor, I would work with this organization specifically under U.S. training. Well, back then it was U.S. Training Command, U.S. TRADOC, and specifically the G2, the intelligence section. Like, their whole job is to make these world ups. And so they have, and so for example, you'll have the Pacific. I think it's
Shmaria.
And whatever name you can think of. Here's the capabilities. Like, that's literally, see, like.
Yeah, and Ariana, Utopia, Denovia, Gorgas. These are hard as fuck. Lemuria, Pertini, and then into Indo-Pacific, Bagansate, Balesia, Gabal, Himmeldesh. Yeah, I think some countries need to get some rebranding. It's pretty good.
But that's literally, and so then what you do is then you can say, okay, well, that country, Ariana has, because then you look up at the World Equipment Guide. So, for example, you want to know, hey, that's Shahed 136 outside of Wikipedia. Well, what's the range? Because, you can say, oh, I don't trust Wikipedia. Yeah. World Equipment Guide, the WEG in the Army. And the WEG literally lays out, like, from an unclassified perspective, all their, like, hey, this is, like, that's it. So right there, put Shahed 136. And this is available for anybody, right? Like anybody can access this. As you can see, you don't need to, there you go. Like even that one, or whichever one. And you...
Shahed 136.
Yeah, and you can see, right, the Duran 2, and then you could go variants, systems, dimensions.
Oh, this is cool.
Right, cost.
This is like fantasy football for how to kill people.
And they have this for everything. You can look up T90s, T72s, probably the Leclerc tank, whatever you want. And it's all right there for people to focus and analyze. And then in these exercises, in these made up worlds, you then grab and say, because you can even look up at in the scenarios, they have it pre-built. Like they already have like Ariana's 10th division is this. And so you could just say, okay, I want this guy, and I want this guy right there.
Yeah.
Eurasia, and then you can look Ariana force structure, operational environment. It's like a whole story.
Whoa.
And then you can...
This is just publicly available.
This is for anybody. And you could just click on it. And
imagine what you fuckers have back there.
Well, that's
It's got infrared.
And then on the right side, you can see equipment breakdown. So you have the command and then the brigades, and then you click on the brigade. They had the battalions, the companies, the platoons, team, like everything you can imagine. And so in a lot of these exercises, especially in the unclassified world, we just say, I want this. This is the operational environment, and go. And then you build, the exercise, and you do that.
And so you knew in 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, at least roughly, as you laid out, what the capabilities are for a country like Iran and what they might do in a war game scenario.
Yeah.
Because our Middle Eastern correspondent, Nico Aronson, was in Dubai right before the bombing started. And they were shocked that all this shit was getting bombed. But you were probably sitting at home going, I remember, yeah, that's about right.
I remember even writing articles, through the company, and all that. I was like, I actually had an interview published afterwards. And I said, hey, if this happens, anticipate airspace to close. The thing was, if Trump, because back then Trump was saying regime change, that was part of the conversation. It's if they go for regime change, all bets are off.
Oh yeah,
because then what is Iran going to do, right? And so that's the thing. And again, I want to preface this very important when we're talking about war games and military exercises. This is another pet peeve of mine. Military exercises or war games are designed to meet training objectives. They're not designed to see who won.
Okay, wait, that's not where I thought you were going.
So people need to understand when you do unless you're at the highest level, right? And some of those conversations would be, for the most part, training exercises are designed, and military exercises are designed because you have training objectives you want to meet. Right. And so the commander is the one who decides that. So the training objective can be, for example, I want to strain our logistics. This is a broad base, right? Because how you do it is, and these are all things you can look at specifically in the Army. So each Army unit has what you call your mission essential task. So the Army basically says, you're an MP, you're a military police unit. These are your mission essential tasks that these are the things you need to know what to do. Do I expect an MP to be an intelligence analyst? No. So that's not a mission essential task. Riot control, for example, could be one of them, right? So based on your mission essential task, then you build training objectives around that, because in the end of the day, you want to see if you get certified. And so when you build exercises and you design it, you do it mostly under the premise of saying, I'm trying to meet the commander's training objectives. So if I have to do between realism or meet training objective is going to be higher, a priority, right? And so this is where, and so for example, this kind of goes back, it's called the sandbox, because then you make up a scenario that in reality, for example, you're going to have more than likely you're an Army unit doing operations, more than likely you'll have air support, right? But I can say in this scenario, nope, I don't want you to have air support at all, because I want you to train as if you don't. Oh, I'm going to flip a switch and say all communications has been shut down because our adversary just shut down all our satellites. So fight, analog without anything, right? There's no redundancy. All else went to fail. Go fight and execute that, because you're trying to train your units on these certain objectives. Okay. And then people get that end result. Well, we had this amount of casualties, and then they say, then this is where I'm getting back to, Iran in this military exercise destroyed 10,000 American soldiers. No, okay, wait, that's not... The perfect example is, I think there's a very famous one where it was a Marine general, I can't remember, I think in 2003 or 2001, where he used speedboats and then those speedboats, he managed to sink an aircraft carrier, right?
With speedboats.
And it's in a simulation. It was a simulated exercise, right? But that you see that reaction. That's my criticism. So it's like, okay, wait. What were the training objectives? What was and then what happened was after the exercise, after they sunk the aircraft carrier, the criticism is, oh, well, they just re-put the aircraft carrier there and then they continue operating. I was like, well, yeah, because let's just pretend, let's say this is a naval exercise and the whole exercise is centered around defending the aircraft carrier. The Marine General destroys it. That one, Millennium Challenge. That's the one, 2000. Like the reporting on this infuriates me because it's like, if it's centered on the aircraft carrier and you sink it, yeah, okay, well, what's the lessons learned? Okay, we'll go back to this. We'll apply it, AAR, after action review. Let's apply all the lessons learned and what happened. Okay, now go back with these lessons learned, reconstitute the aircraft carrier and run the exercise now with these lessons learned. Because what, you sink the aircraft, oh, okay, a 1 week exercise is done after 24 hours, everybody can go home. No, like that's the thing. And I think people grab these things and you see that in the reporting and they grab the wrong aspects of the exercise or they use it as gospel of the Bible rather than saying, hey, in the end of the day, these are made up scenarios because they're designed to meet a training objective.
And also, and this might be a little bit of an amateur way of looking at it from the total outside, but you're also getting to some outcomes sometimes that are going to be like the 0.5% scenario. And then it's over delted, if you will, is like, oh, this is a 50% scenario because it was so easy, but that's not realistic.
Especially in simulations, because there's like where I think when most people think of military exercises, like where you're weighing, the soldiers and like that actually exists. But when you're dealing at large scale, generally a lot of these are simulated. I can give a perfect example. We did a military exercise, just a normal one for when I was in the MPs, and it was all simulated, right? So it was centered on the staff of the unit. So you have your battalion staff, your brigade staff, and it was really centered on that. And so the line units, what we'd call like the companies and like the soldiers, a lot of that had to be simulated, obviously, because we didn't have, so there was a live component and then a simulation.
You've heard a lot of U.S. Special Forces guys come in here and tell their stories. But have you ever wondered what it feels like to shoot with the same precision tech many of them do? Well, good news. After years of research and development, MCG Tactical just dropped something incredible. The Stinger Combat Sight. This isn't your average red dot. Using holographic technology once reserved only for elite military and law enforcement units, the Stinger delivers crystal clear precision. So accurate, you could hit a dime at 300 yards without even trying. This is the exact same level of technology used by the pros, but here's the twist. Most sites like this are going to run you $600 or more, and people out there happily pay it. But right now, through an exclusive deal with MCG Tactical, you can get this mil-spec sight for under $200. And it gets even better. For my listeners out there, today you're going to get 67% off. Just scan the QR code you see on your screen or go to mcgtac.com/Dorey, link in my description below. There's only one catch. Supply is tight and these things are flying off the shelves. So if you want a site built for the best, now's your shot. Grab yours using the link in my description below before they shut down orders.
Well, in the simulation, the adversary was not North Korea, but had a very similar force structure as North Korea. It was one of those made up countries. I was like, okay, this is North Korea. We all get it, right? Now, in this exercise, what happened was somehow, don't ask me how, they managed to get a regiment, which is about 3,000 soldiers, bypass the front lines. And then that regiment encountered one of our companies, an MP company. Again, all this simulated. They fought. And I kid you not, the MP company, which is a couple hundred soldiers at most, managed to destroy
3,000,
3,000, like not North Korean soldiers, but the MP company suffered 50% casualty rate.
Oh.
Okay. Now, for 200 against 3,000, there are 100 left. Now,
yeah, it's like 300 the movie.
Do you believe for a second that that's real? No. Now, it's like, don't fight the game. That's another thing in military. You run with what happened. And so what the scenario then was built around that, because that happened, it was a fluke. And instead of saying, okay, reset, we said, no, we're going to take this as an opportunity to train our staff in a mass casualty event. And now we have a unit that's combat ineffective. So how do we address that as a staff? Combat ineffective, mass casualty event, go. And that's what we did. But I can then, by that logic and everything here, let me grab that. An MP company can kill an entire North Korean regiment. And I can write a whole article about that. And it's not a lie, but it's just not reality because
Right.
it's simulation. And that's where the criticism of some of these and how this talk about from an exercise perspective, how those types of narratives, and especially to the media, you can kind of manipulate and really push something that's not real or reality in how it's done. And some of that is even with Russia, Ukraine and the drones. Like, yes, there's a lot of important lessons learned that should be done, but that's one type of war that's not necessarily how the US or the West is designed to fight, which is much more air dominant centric. And that's not and we're a maneuver centric force. And what we're seeing in Russia, Ukraine is positional warfare. And those are different things that, although lessons are learned, we shouldn't like automatically assume one over the other.
Got it. Well, again, because you ended up bouncing up very close to when this really did blow up, no pun intended.
Yeah.
But like, my first question would be, whether it was the people you directly reported to or the things that were coming down the chain of command, like tone-wise over the years that you were specifically looking at Iran as a potential threat, were you sensing at all that there was almost a push to, go find the body so we can have the crime, so we can go do this?
Again, I was just a contractor designed for military exercises, and we tracked intelligence, all that, but like that, at the end of the day, that's more of a conversation at the National Security Council level, at the White House level. Like that is a way down where we're at. And it's like, even the guys there, we're there to protect the soldiers with our equipment, like the Patriot. That is not what's done. But to get to your point, when Trump was, building up the troops in the Middle East, one of the things I was telling people is like, look, I don't know if Trump is going to do it, but if he wants to do it, these are the assets you want in place to do it. Right? Like that. So you can't analyze. In the end of the day, it's like any individual. You can't get in somebody's head. You can't get in Putin's head. You can't get in Xi Jinping's head. You can't get in Trump's head. You can't get in Macron's head. You just can't. So you have to look at everything around. And even outside, this New York Times report, administration official says X, Y, Z, but NBC says Y, 1, 2, 3. Okay. That's noise. Look at the hard data. What's hard data? Military movement, assets being deployed.
Sure.
That's how you start knowing something was different.
Sure.
Yeah. And again, every administration, elections matter. I mean, that's what I say. I was there during the first Trump administration and then the Biden administration, and then I left, and then here comes the second administration. If you love it or hate it, that's in the end of the day what happened. But when people kind of were back then, he said no new wars. It's like, this guy killed General Soleimani.
Right. Now, you were on duty when that happened. That was January 2020.
So I was, funny enough, I was on vacation. And when I saw that, I was like, are you kidding me?
What made you say that?
It was General Soleimani.
Right.
I mean, it's just like, it was just insane. It was like, what? Like and to the point where I would tell people, it's like I think people forget, like, how this all happened because, if memory serves me correctly, in 2019, in the end of 2019, there was a problem of pro-Iranian militia groups in Iraq attacking U.S. forces in Iraq. And a contractor, if I'm not mistaken, or an American died in one of these attacks. So then the U.S. retaliated, killed a bunch of these militia members. It was a tit for tat. And what precipitated before the killing of Soleimani was these militia groups got a bunch of protesters to, quote, like, they stormed the U.S. embassy. They never breached it. They never got through, but they kind of went like past the initial gate and they kind of stormed it. And then that ended with, after that, Trump said, okay, we're killing Soleimani. Like, holy shit.
Yeah. Hey guys, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's a huge, huge help. Thank you.
And then what happened? Then Iran responded with the ballistic missile strikes against Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, right? Where no Americans were killed, but hundreds suffered TBI injuries, right? But, that was, to me, I think, I thought a lot of us, me specifically, I thought after Soleimani was killed, there was a belief in me that thought, man, Iran's they're going to have to go hard on this response. Not the Al-Assad.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
Then they didn't.
They blinked.
They did.
Like you said, they had the one strike, no one died. Yes, there were some casualties, which is never good, but like that was the top dog. That was like,
he was the number 2.
Yeah, that was like taking out someone extremely high in a country.
Yeah.
You would think like that would be the time where they'd launch some sort of ballistic missile towards maybe multiple countries and really inflict some pain. And they had all the propaganda where like the Ayatollah was crying on air, had all the kids crying behind him. We're going to avenge this, the whole bit. And they didn't, which was part of the reason why, fast forwarding, when you make the argument about Iran, it's one of the most annoying conversations I have with anyone, because you have to hold multiple thoughts at the same time. Right? So, yeah, they don't like us. Yeah, their regime is bad. Yeah, their regime is tyrannical. They kill their people. These are all horrible things. China kills the Uyghurs every day, and we're not fucking invading China. You know, unfortunately, you can't just go willy-nilly, be like, you know what, fuck it. I think I'll invade somewhere today just because I can. That's not how the world works. And when you're dealing with a nation of 93 million people that has, as you know, a significant weapons arsenal to be able to respond and also inflict damage on other countries that aren't us, that are going to be pissed about it, who didn't make this decision, that creates a problem. So fast forwarding, though, from 2020 to 2025, before we get to what happened here, when you saw the 12-day war break out and the bombing of, you know, places that you weren't covering from an intel perspective, but the bombing of Forda and nuclear sites in Iran, did you think that that was going to be the end of it? Or were you like, oh, fuck, this is...
It was very interesting. The fact that it was an Israel-Iran fight was very interesting. Obviously I can't go too much into details, right? Because, and it's like, you know, it was a very interesting dynamic that in many aspects, I think in our minds, and how, if you were to ask me in 2023, let's say, or 2024, well, let's not say 2024 because October 7th really changed everything. 2022, 2023, right before October 7th. If there was a scenario where Iran and Israel were kind of going at it and the US kind of didn't get involved, that would have been very interesting to me, because it kind of would have shattered kind of my presumptions, my assumptions, and how things would have operated and worked, right? Like, so, but what was interesting is Israel was the one who initiated the attack against Iran, right? That was a very interesting development. And I think where Iran was blinking ever since October 7th, 2023.
What do you mean blinking?
Because what happened was you enabled Israel to go one by one and pick off the proxies. They managed to get off Hamas. Then they managed to significantly weaken Hezbollah. Bashar al-Assad fell. They lost Syria. So that land bridge that they had to Hezbollah, gone. So at some point, and the Iranians weren't doing anything to respond, right? And when Hamas, I think the worst case scenario that we all envisioned in the Middle East would have been October 7th, but with Hezbollah and Iran getting involved in all the proxies all at once. And I think Sinwar, the former Yanwa Sinwar, who the mastermind of the October 7th, that's what he wanted.
Yes.
He wanted that to happen because in his idea was it was going to be enough to overwhelm Israel. And the interesting aspect, though, from a U.S. perspective is we weren't focused on the Middle East in 2023. We were focused. What? In 2023, it was Russia-Ukraine with Biden.
Well, I know we have a big focus there, but you're saying we weren't focused at all on the Middle East?
We were the priority wasn't the Middle East. If anything, there was a reduction of force in the Middle East because of what was going on.
Yeah, buy that.
So now you can start seeing this idea. Well, wait a minute. Like after October 7th, what did the Biden administration do? They started to deploy a lot of forces to the Middle East to support it. But I think Yanwa Sinwar, in his mind, he wanted the word that in his mind, in this very diabolical thought process of this is the moment. Benjamin Netanyahu's weakened politically. There was mass protests in Israel. The United States is consumed because of Russia, Ukraine. They're pulling out forces. We have the Axis resistance. There's nothing holding us back. Now is the time.
Yeah.
And then he launched it, and everybody was like, what are you doing? Like the Axis of resistance. In what universe are you thinking? To the point where even Hezbollah was like, I mean, yeah, we'll do some things, but we're not gonna do what you did. And so what happened was Israel then was able to go one by one by one. And I think one of the detrimental facts was the loss of Syria for Iran, Bashar al-Assad falling. Like that was a serious, that if there's one thing that
supply routes alone.
If you're going to make a history book, let's say the collapse of the Axis of resistance, the before and after is the fall of Bashar al-Assad, right? I mean, that is the whole reason why Iran was so invested in Syria. And so that's why when, Entente garrison in Syria, it's a huge aspect because of, in reality, it was, against ISIS. No, it was like against Iran. That's why it was a huge component. Now going to 2025, when Israel conducted the strike against Iran, it was very interesting that Iran didn't target the U.S. or the Gulf. That was very interesting. And it was interesting that Trump decided to bomb, the nuclear facilities and then use that as an excuse to end the fighting, Right. It's like so the only thing I can think of was there concern in the administration that even though this was Israel-Iran, at some point Iran was going to say, okay, enough is enough. We're going to have to start targeting all these other countries and the US to force them to stop with Israel. Because whatever, you can hear what people say, oh, the Israelis were they begged Iran to, no, guys, they didn't. Like, I'm sorry, whatever universe you think of your operating end of, Israel had no necessity to stop. They had none. They really didn't want to stop. Trump bombed the nuclear plants, the nuclear facilities, and told Benjamin Netanyahu, you're done. You're out. We're done with this. I don't know if the reason why they did that is because they were concerned that Iran, what we saw now in February, was going to do some significant retaliation to force the Israelis to stop. Because I think people don't, like, the U.S. has a lot of influence over Israel. I mean, I know people are going to talk AIPAC and Israel and the U.S. People talk to Israeli nationalists, like in Israel, their main criticism is the influence that the U.S. has on Israeli decision-making.
I mean, that's just the ultimate projection I've ever heard in my life. That's ridiculous. 8 months, dude, this went from... in June 2025, they're gone. We bombed all their nuclear capabilities. Total victory. It's over. To 8 months later, we're putting our boots on the ground, and it's our boots going there while they go and ethnically cleanse the fuck out of Lebanon. I'm sorry. That's a one-way street where a nation of 9 million people is basically telling our fucking president, like a little bitch, what to do. I don't understand how like, if they're going to say, the nationalists in Israel, oh, the U.S. has too much influence here, in my opinion, that's just because the psycho nationalists over there actually expect to have 100% influence, and they're upset when they only get 99. So
what I think people for the 2026, what was very like, let's look at 2026, and this is what it's just like, why 2026? Why February 28, 2026? What was the reason? Because let's not forget, what started in 2026 was the capture of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela.
Who's got a lot of oil.
And by the way,
they're still under communist control right now. People forget about that.
Well, I would say, just taking a step back from Delcy Rodriguez's perspective, I would say you can talk to a lot of people. Like, it is insane how, yes, in name socialism and they love it, but in reality, I mean, they're doing what the U.S. tells them to do. I mean, it is like they told Delcy Rodriguez, stop sending oil to Cuba. Got it. Stop. Yeah. We're done. No issues. We're going to send our Department of Energy, Secretary of Energy there. We're going to send our executives. We're going to do all this. Like, yep. The Southcom commander, I think it's General Donovan, went to Caracas less than a month after the bombing of Caracas and the capturing. The Southcom commander, the commander responsible for that operation, a couple weeks later, landed in Caracas to meet with them.
Yeah.
I mean, right. So now it was funny because kind of tying the cartel to Iran, the thought process was, and even me talking to people like, dude, Mexican cartels are next. Like, the cartels are next. But I think what people really don't put too much emphasis on is the protests that happened in Iran. The protests in Iran, for some reason, one way or another, fundamentally changed the trajectory of U.S. military might in the Western Hemisphere to focus onto the Middle East.
And part of it, here's the thing, though. One of the reasons I hate having to argue about the Iran war is because the idea of even having to slightly steel man radicals who run that country, which is what they are. Let's not get it twisted, is so intellectually annoying to me. Yet I get forced to do it because I believe it was in January, Scott Bessent, who, is our Treasury Secretary, was running around Davos on camera, bragging about the sanctions he was putting on Iran and bragging about the fact that he was going to take their currency effectively to zero.
Which it is.
Which it is.
Yep.
Which he then said would force people into the streets and cause protests. And because they know that the regime is crazy, they would kill those people. I don't even think in his defense, he mentioned the fact that we were going to try to arm the Kurds, which, went totally ass backwards with that and foment a lot of this. He definitely didn't mention the fact about Mossad's involvement in that operation. That's fine. That's not his world or whatever. But I look at that and I go, if I see a psycho down the street on the side of the street having a fucking crackhead freak out or something, and I go and load a fucking weapon for him, and I hand it to him, and I say, have fun.
Yep.
I get charged in court.
Yeah, but that's where the difference between us as individuals and governments. They don't play the same rules as we do.
They don't play with the same rules as we do. But when I look at it that way, I cannot, like, I'm not going to criticize other governments, whether it's Iran or Israel, and not also criticize my own.
Oh,
as
yeah.
well.
And what I would say is, if you look at the because you're right, because the currency, the real, is worthless. I mean, it is just, and it's continuously to go under free fall. But I would say that the Iranian regime and the Islamic Republic, it also, in their mindset, because it can be, I think there can be multiple truths at once. Because right now we're doing this, by the way, at Cuba, right? The blockade against Cuba, the stopping of the oil is to cause the electricity to go out and then force people on the street. And then we indicted Raul Castro, the former president, right? And it's the same, because it's kind of following in some ways the Venezuela model. They're doing it in the Cuba model, and then Iran. Like, this is something that this administration is really doing. And then Iran, I think the history of the protests in Iran is very well documented. And the U.S. government's argument is we're not forced to do business with anybody if we can force government. Same with Iran, because they pick and choose. What was interesting after, though, going to my point, what I was saying, when the protests ended, I think we can all remember there was like reports that Trump might have done like he was going to do a strike against Iran.
Yes. Because
of the protests, because he said that True Social, no protest killed, et cetera, et cetera. But what did we see then afterwards? Was a massive deployment of U.S. combat power to the Middle East. At that point, that's where going back, it's like you can talk to your sources in the cabinet, you can talk about this. It doesn't matter. What are they planning? Yep. And that's what I would focus on, a military exercise. Going back to the original thing, it's like, do I build a military exercise where I'm deploying forces? I have all the forces, or I have none of the forces. That's the parameters are set. Sure. So when I saw that, I'm like, is war going to happen? I don't know. But I can tell you for a fact, the option is there. And if they're going to do it, it's going to be big. And it's not going to be what we saw at the Fordo, just the nuclear bombing of the facility in Natanz.
Oh, no, this is real.
It was going to be, if you wanted to do regime change, this is how you're going to do it. And then the U.S. responded. And when I get kind of, I got criticized for this for a lot. What I would tell people from my own experience, people might not believe me, but I was like, I expected Iran to do a lot more damage and be a lot worse than what I saw.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Because again, they did
do damage.
They did, but not to the degree that I thought they were going to be, right? So look at the amount of missiles and drones like the amount of missiles and drones that were launched and the kind of the trajectory. Now, the argument people make as well, they wanted to extend it. They needed that deterrence, which is true. Iranians want to do some of the extended, et cetera. They had an understanding, but then that shows that there was a significant degradation, that they weren't able to sustain large scale attacks at the beginning, right? So I think the first couple of days is when Iran had, and I think this is when you go into military might, right? What is the goal of the U.S. at this point from a military perspective? At the beginning of the war is you do the initial strikes against the command and control elements, but the number one priority for the U.S. always going to be destroy the air defense. We want to destroy their air defense so we can enable our fighter jets to operate freely over Iran, right? Mm-hmm. So while we're focusing on that, that's a window of opportunity for Iran to launch their attacks to try to halt our ability to do that. What the Iranians were more focused on doing, though, was, yes, they struck military bases and their damages. We knew this because one of the things that happened before the war started, we evacuated bases, right? Especially the one closest, because again, we knew this is what they're going to do, pull these guys out. Because those military bases were built with the mindset of Al-Qaeda, Iraq, the Taliban, not against a country with the largest ballistic missile force there. And you have to take into account they have a threat. So
hold on, back up a minute.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I never heard someone put it that way before. Those bases are designed thinking about Al-Qaeda and some of these terror groups and stuff, but not about countries that could have a significant.
So think of it in the sense of if you put a lot of these bases, for example, Ayudid Air Base in Qatar, right? And we still have people there, right? And you're building that. You build it. Look at the distance between Qatar to Iran. Very short.
Yeah, it's not far.
What is one of the largest arsenals that Iran has in their ballistic missile program? Short-range ballistic missiles.
And what's the official range?
I would say, so it depends who you ask and all that. Be careful.
Conservative estimate.
I'm going to be very careful. A couple hundred miles, and I'm just going to leave it very kind of vaguely in that, just to make sure. But for example, one of the platforms I would recommend people to look up, for example, the FATEH 110 or the FATEH 110 or FATEH 313.
Okay.
So you can look those up, the FATEH 110 or FATEH 313. These are Iranian short-range ballistic missiles that have these are very effective. One of the largest that they have in the arsenal, right? Short-range ballistic missiles. These were designed in many aspects to target those U.S. military bases. So so those military bases, although yes, a lot of that was because of Iran and containment, et cetera, the question is there's a thought process is during peacetime and during war. So when war happens, those military bases right there along the coast, I'm not sitting there. They have more ballistic missiles than we have interceptors. Let's make this clear. We know they have more drones. Like, we know this. So the question then is, when you build military installations, it's like this. It's like the Cold War. This is the argument. The U.S. military bases in West Berlin, yeah, they were built in the mindset of the Soviet Union for containment and all this and messaging. But if the Soviets decided to invade West Berlin, was there a fighting chance in hell that those soldiers were going to survive? No. Let's be real. If the Soviet Union ever decided to invade West Berlin, there's the West Berlin U.S. forces there. We're not going to stop it. And so the thought process in the Middle East is when you're building these bases, yes, in a containment perspective, and they're there from air, but the moment war happens, those just become prime targets.
Right.
And they become almost like, in a way, a liability. They become a liability. And they weren't designed in this mindset of how now the U.S. military is going towards just like less, where I also go back to is like this building of these massive forward operating bases, these massive bases, like with the Burger Kings and the green beans and all that. That was a GWAT mindset.
Yeah.
And now with Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, even with Iran, a lot of that mindset says, no, you have to be expeditionary. You still need some of these large scale bases to project power, for air combat, for refueling, supply, logistics, absolutely. But you're not going to do what we have now, which is all this ring around Iran of just large infrastructures that you can't do anything with it. And Iran knows, I just need to hit those because then I can go into the information space and say, look, see, I hit you guys. And then they say, oh my God, how did we not expect? It's like, well, I mean, yes, we did. Why do you think we evacuated soldiers?
Yeah. Now, once it did, obviously, you correctly point out when you're deploying all those assets to the Middle East at the rate they were, forget even just the scale. Of course, you're planning on doing something, and at some point that's going to happen. Nonetheless, the goalposts of what the goals of the war was supposed to be seemed to constantly move. Like at the beginning, it was like, we want a regime change Iran, and I talked to a couple sources a week before the actual invasion, or like 5 days, 3 to 5 days before the invasion, after John Kiriakou had talked about it on here. I talked to a couple other people, and they're like, yeah, there's people that are telling that, like, Trump believes, based on a couple people that are talking to him, that he could make a regime change within a couple weeks of this place, and it would be over, and it'd be like the bow tie on his legacy. He'd be the guy that took down the Iranian regime. The reality is, you are looking at invading a place that we already laid out has a lot of people. It is geographically very, very protected in many ways. You're now fighting on their territory, which can actually have the opposite effect of some people who don't even like the regime now being like, you know what, fuck it, we're being attacked. And they also didn't seem to have like a plan for what to do once it started. Like, it was constantly like, well, we'll do this. You know what? No. And they didn't even know that the Strait of Hormuz would be basically like held captive, even though there were a lot of intelligence sources saying it would. So first question, were you surprised at all by the Strait of Hormuz becoming an issue?
No, we planned this on, like, it was literally like, yeah, I mean, again, but it goes back to General Votel. They asked him this question. And he literally answered, and I think it was with the National, the UAE. They asked him, well, how did you not anticipate this? And he kind of looks, what are you talking? Of course we did.
Yeah, we told him.
And again, it goes back to my previous perspective. When you're planning stuff, right? How do you execute those plans? And you cannot do an all, like, I want air supremacy. I want the Straits of Hormuz open at once. I want to do this. I want to, like, there's phases of operations and how to do things. And then that's the thing. So you have the threats that are existing right now would be very interesting. For example, Project Freedom gets reannounced, like this whole, Straits of Hormuz and these naval forces go through. It's also interesting that this diplomatic route. I don't disagree with you. I think the messaging specifically from the top has been all over the place. And I think that's where I think if there's a lesson learned for anybody who wants to continue, like that's why you have to have discipline in your communications department and how you message to the American people. Because this also was a war for most of the vast majority of American people we're not expecting or anticipating.
Yeah.
And so that's also a problem.
I wonder why.
But going back to, from a military perspective, from Iran, I also I was expecting a lot worse. Flat out, 100%. Their capabilities were robust. You can look at all they had, the numbers they were launching, some of the military bases that were hit, we knew they were going to hit them. Even the one where they hit the E3 Century, the commanding, the AWACS in Saudi Arabia. Okay. Right. That was a significant hit. But then you hear people making these arguments, well, how did we not do this and this and this and this? Again, goes back to, do you know, before you make this analysis, are you aware of how many military installations U.S. military forces are able to operate in the Middle East when they're bombing Iran? Mm-hmm. Do you know, you won't, but do you know that? Number two, you also have, any commander will tell you there's areas where you have to assume risk. Why do commanders exist in the military? From a platoon leader all the way to a COCOM commander, because they're officers, they're the commanders, because they're the ones at certain echelon that can assume risk and make a decision with risk in mind. Right? If I'm a S2, I'm an intelligence officer, and I tell my battalion commander, hey, sir, if the enemy is here, if you do this, this is the risk that we're going to see. Me, the S2 and the S3, and we brief the commander. The commander is going to look at that and say, can I make this decision myself? Or do I have to go to higher to say, hey, I need authorities to make this decision and to assume risk. And I think that gets ignored. And so when you're talking about the strike at Prince Sultan Air Base that destroyed the AWACS, like, well, why do we have all our forces there? Because the priority was air superiority and air supremacy over Iran. That means you had to concentrate a certain amount of forces, refueler capability, aircraft capability in certain areas that were going to be a target. So you try to mitigate that risk with air defense. And if you have the ability to maybe harden structures, but you don't have unlimited resources. That's another thing. Everybody thinks, oh, we can throw everything at once, all there. And it's like, again, that's not how reality works. Right. And so, again, I just go back to, I think how I would say this, look at the 91 Gulf War and compare it to Iran. Saddam Hussein shot down more American aircraft and killed more American airmen and even captured American pilots than Iran did in this war. So if you look at the 91 Gulf War and you look at this war, you actually, if anything, you can make the argument you've seen an improvement. The vast majority of U.S. aircraft losses in Iran were drones, MQ-9 drones. Because the MQ-9 drones was very interesting. I think he was in the Air Force. I don't remember his exact position. He said, yeah, we were using the MQ-9s to go over, heavily utilizing them for strikes. Because in the end of the day, well, they're drones. If they get shot down, we're not risking our pilots. So that's what they kind of really push that risk. Yeah. And so that's why they were more likely to get shot down. But that's why they're there. Again, that's why officers in the military exist. Yeah, I want that because in the end of the day, I want to destroy this asset. I'm willing to assume that risk. So if you
business expense.
Right. And so if you look at it, 91 to now, and you look at the combat power losses, Saddam Hussein did better, which shows that the U.S., even with the country with the most advanced ballistic missile program and drone program in the Middle East, did worse than Saddam Hussein. And I think most people can't comprehend that, and they look at the civilian strikes and the Dubai airport and the oil refiners. And Iran knows how to do that because they know that's how they're going to get the U.S. to back off. That's their whole point. You can make the argument the U.S. should never have done that. And I don't want people to look at this and say, I'm advocating this war. I'm not advocating this war. That's not what I'm saying.
Right, you're breaking
I'm just saying this is, and if the president say go, and I'm an officer, it's like, okay, we go. And then if I'm right there, I'm right about to win, and I'm like, oh, and then the president or or an officer above me says, stop, well, I stop.
Yeah.
That's the chain of command. And so that, in the end of the day, is the president. Are we going to go back to war? Maybe, maybe not. Are there going to be a diplomatic solution? Maybe, maybe not. But that's a separate conversation than here.
Well, not to compare apples to ice cream here because they are entirely different scenarios. That said, when you look at the 28-minute war in Venezuela, which was a brilliantly executed mission, no doubt, regardless of whether you think they should have gone in there or not, they executed it perfectly. That relied heavily on artificial intelligence to basically war plan it and then execute it. And, again, totally different. But what do you know anything about what the setup is for the utilization of AI on the battlefield in Iran and where maybe that's gone wrong in places where they thought it was going to go right?
I go back to from I'll get to the AI piece in a second, but it's two different objectives, right? With Trump, what the U.S. did against Maduro was a very specific capture leader, pull him out. in Iran, it wasn't just the strike that killed Khamenei, the supreme leader. Like, it wasn't just a one and done. It was a dedicated campaign of absolute degradation of Iranian military capabilities. The Navy, the Air Force, the ballistic missile force, the production capabilities in the nuclear facilities, and even some of the leadership and ground forces in besieged. Like, the Israelis did a lot more of that, right? They led a lot more of that aspect. Now, you're getting the reports, they reconstitute. Take a step back. Be very cautious when you read articles that said leaked intelligence says this. And here's the reason why.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's not because they're lying. I don't like throwing fake news. I think that's disingenuous and not fair for reporters who are just trying to do their job in the situation they're at. What I would tell people is multiple things. One, did they have access to the full intelligence report, or did people tell them? And then when people tell them, the question is, okay, the intelligence report can say this, but there's other things that are very important. For example, what's the methodology? What's the scope of the intelligence report? So what were they trying to analyze? The methods they tried to achieve that. The sources they used, and more important, the confidence level. Was it a low, medium, or high confidence level? That matters. I, as an intelligence official, could say, let's say you're my commander. Sir, we have a single source human report indicating that there's going to be an IED attack at this location at this time. That's an analysis. But my confidence level, sir, it's low confidence because it's one person. Now, let's say that person has a 5-year history of excellent reporting, 99% success rate in his intelligence. Oh, well, maybe I can say, maybe I'm going to say a medium based on standards that we have. Or maybe that triggers a high confidence because he's such a reliable source. Now, let's say I got a single source report and then I have intercepts of that's the confidence level. And I think that's why a lot of times the news organization, and you might then see the CENTCOM commander when they grill him in an open, and congressman plays against, like, you're a congressman, you know what you're doing. You can go to it behind the scenes, you know what's going on. They brief you. You have a skiff. Okay, like some of these is like, I got it. But
it's all political.
I got it, But and you see the the general there, and he's like, or the admiral's like, I can't say this here. I can't. He just said, well, I disagree, and we'll talk about that behind a classified setting. But that's where you kind of have these disagreements. Right. That kind of go on, because I think some of that the media doesn't necessarily capture, either because they don't want to, they think it overcomplicates, or they don't understand. And one of those is, for example, like the CIA, we can go to this later, the CNN report of it, like the CIA assassination against cartel members in Mexico. I don't know if you saw that.
From CNN.
CNN reported, and then New York Times subsequently later, but differently, said that there was plans, that the CIA ground branch had plans to kind of conduct assassinations inside of Mexico against cartel members. Not an intelligent report,
but assassinate them, and they work with them.
So I think some of these, again, issues. But yeah, that's what I would say. So because now the conversation when the military strikes happened against Iran, it was very different than Venezuela. Yeah, that's the one. I have issues with this report we can go into, but...
Yeah, but let's break it down since we're on it. So this was from May 12th, 2026. So this is a good real life example. What were the things that stood out to you here? It says, by the way, I just want to read the headline. CIA escalates secret war on cartels with deadly operations inside Mexico.
Yeah. So number one, okay, so that video is from a car that was driving. This happened near Mexico City, and recorded the back end of that explosion. And so in that car... I remember seeing this, and like when it first came out, it was like the guy who they killed, his name is El Piyin, right? Piyin, Piyin, El Piyin, and you can actually probably find the video of that explosion where they killed him. I don't know if you're gonna get flagged for doing that, but that's like,
won't put it on the screen.
But you can, yeah. But I mean, it's like all over X, Twitter, social media. Like, it's easily found.
Yeah, let's watch that and hear it.
So. First of all, so he wasn't like, I mean, you can make the argument, maybe he was mid-level, and I mean, that's kind of like a stretch in many aspects. Like, oh, okay. I didn't even know who he was until after the fact. And the only reason why I knew who he was is because later accounts identified him working for another guy whose alias is 4x1, right? Mm-hmm. Or El Mencho. He's a lieutenant, a top lieutenant of the Mayito Flacos in Sinaloa. Okay. The area where that guy is based out of, last year, there was a major drug bust there where they seized multiple meth labs that were producing like tons of methamphetamines, like an excessive amount of methamphetamines. So that's the one. I mean, I think he should be fine, but
yeah, well, we'll leave it off air just in case YouTube's been really tough.
But that's the one. And so the
that was it. That killed him.
Yeah, that's it. Because the argument is they put the explosive devices in the car, and it detonated and killed them. And so when it first happened,
like a little firework.
When it first happened, we were all like, "Was this?" I mean, we all assumed it had to be Los Chapitos.
Right.
Like those are the only ones. And then CNN just came out and said, oh, no, it was actually the US CIA. And it was like, okay, why would and then subsequently after that, there's a New York Times report that said, well, it wasn't a CIA unilateral operation done by Ground Branch. It was a CIA coordinated operation with the Mexicans, and the Mexican intelligence were the one who killed. Well, I don't even think they identified who was the one who did it, but they just said the Mexicans did it. It's just the CIA gave the intelligence. Okay. Still, why? The only logical explanation I can think of is you want to cause mass paranoia within the organization. So you start doing assassinations. They're thinking there's somebody inside, or there's somebody with my rivals working, and they managed to penetrate my organization. They're killing my guys off. So now you cause mass paranoia and mass confusion, and then that causes tensions within the organization. I talked to sources from this. They said this is bullshit. Like they don't believe it at all. And then
what kind of sources are you talking with for that? Without revealing there.
I would just say, let me answer this. If this were true, you would have seen the Mexican government run like wild on this story. Because before this,
I agree.
Before this, 2 CIA officers died in a car accident in Chihuahua. And the Mexican president, by the way, lied through her fucking teeth, saying, oh, we didn't know. Right? So these officers, what happened was they helped the Chihuahua State Police do a drug raid that seized a couple of drug labs in Chihuahua, right? I think it was Luis Chaparro then said that the reason why the CIA was involved is because they had the tech to help find these drug labs. Okay. But then the federal government, we didn't know CIA was operating in Chihuahua with the Chihuahua State Police. Okay, the CIA is not risking an extensive intelligence cooperation and agreement between the U.S. and Mexico because of a drug lab. Sorry to the people. No, they're not going to do that. 2, if they're working with the Chihuahua State Police, the federal government is going to be made aware of that. And if anything, are also actively cooperating. But why did Claudia Sheinbaum say, oh, we weren't aware? The governor of Chihuahua belongs to a rival political party that then she can use as a political weapon against her for upcoming elections. And say, because it's not Morena political party, right? So that's why she said that. And my argument is, by the way, the head of security for Mexico, like what would be equivalent to the Department of Homeland Security for Mexico, or his name is Omar Harfuch. He is very well liked in the U.S. I mean, extremely well liked, bipartisan support, gets a lot of praises. He went on Newsmax, very interestingly, to do his interview with the U.S. media. Newsmax, you know why? He wanted to get into, he wants to get in to get in the conservative and the Trump's ear. Omar Harfuch is a very powerful figure within Mexico and has done a lot to coordinate with the United States. There's no universe where the CIA would have done an operation in Mexico against, unilaterally in Chihuahua. It just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't. So then, using that as an example, you're telling me that the CNN drops this a couple of weeks later, or not even a couple of weeks, like a week later, that they're, what did the Mexican government say? Omar Harfuch, shortly after this article was published, blasted CNN's reporting, said this is fundamentally false. And then when the New York Times reported, well, it was the U.S. intelligence support, but it was done by the Mexicans, Claudia Sheinbaum literally on her morning press briefing said, oh, this is fantasy land. No, the Mexicans didn't kill it. Like it was a universal condemnation of not of the U.S. actions, but of the reporting. And so that's why I have a lot of doubts on this report. And because again, he maybe, that he was 4x1, which is Mayito Flaco, and there were some drug labs last year, but it's not a major figure. If you would have told me, for example, El Panu So let me backtrack. There was a string of very interesting assassinations that happened in 2025, early 2026, with this one kind of being the one. But in December 2025, there was 2 assassinations that really piqued my interest that were specifically against los Chapitos, the rivals of los Mayitos. It was El Panu, who was the head of security. It was El Panu, head of security, and then a guy named the Alchemist. The Alchemist. Yes. So he was he was killed in Culiacan. He was suspected of being involved in a lot of the drug labs, like manufacturing and all that. There was 2 assassinations, but the big one was El Panu. El Panu was the head of security. He took over after El Perris. El Perris was the head of security because he took after El Nini. So El Perris was killed by Mexican special forces. El Nini was captured by Mexican special forces, right? So like the head of security of Los Chapitos continues to go down, like captured, killed. And then El Panu, he was in Mexico City and then just randomly assassinated in Mexico City. Like,
how did they still have power? They've been in this whole like civil war. Their leader's been gone now for a while. The sons have had all the problems and have been extradited to the U.S. And now like you have the Mexican government continually taking out their head of security. Like, how are they still functioning?
You know, it's funny. I literally yesterday was on with Katarina, her dispatch on Ironclad. We literally had the whole episode was talking about this.
Well, let's do it.
I would say, I think. It's very interesting to your point, like how, right? Let's say, again, like we did with Iran, let's go back in time. When I started my account, let's say it's 2023.
Allegedly.
Right. Yeah, you can look at my social Twitter.
You were like Kevin Durant. You had them burners, boy. You were sitting back there and Intel like, yes, sir. Yo, you ain't gonna believe this shit, Twitter.
So let's say it's 2023, and you would have told me that in 2026, Mayo Zambada would have been captured by the U.S. and is in U.S. federal custody. El Mencho was killed. El Jardinero was captured.
I miss him. He was awesome.
And the only one remaining out of those guys is Ivan fucking Archibaldo. I'm like, you're out of your goddamn mind. If anything, Ivan Archibaldo, I would have, if Polymarket was a thing, I would have bet Ivan Archibaldo was gone.
Putting aside El Mencho, or not El Mencho, El Mayo for a second, because there's a reason I want to put him aside specifically. Why were the other ones so surprising? I agree, they're definitely surprising in any scenario in 2023, but like they do have huge targets on their back. No?
Right, but they were also, but there is a kind of a fundamental shift in this aspect of this conversation was this idea that they were viewed as untouchable. Maybe not El Jardinero. But El Mencho? Yeah. We saw why. I have my own theories about that, by the way, about the El Mencho. Yeah, I think there was a little fuckery in that in a good way, in a different way.
In a good way.
And I think that.
Oh, this is fun.
Let me get to the Ivan part, and I promise I'll jump into that.
I just want to know what they did to my man El Jardinero.
Well, they captured, which was very interesting about Jardinero. There was no narco blockades.
What do you mean?
Okay, so generally when they capture a cartel leader, what do you see? Like El Mencho, right? What happened? Mexico goes to shit.
Right.
But not necessarily a retaliation, but like they try to stop it. So how do they stop it? They like do the narco blockades, they burn businesses, they shoot places up, right? Like they did that with the Culiacanazos. Ovidio Guzman twice. You see every time. Oh, there's narco, because they get somebody. The fact that El Jardinero got captured and there was no narco blockades, no burning of vehicles, nothing. It was just like Omar Harfuch came out, yeah, we got El Jardinero.
Sounds a little weird.
What the fuck?
Yeah, what's happening there?
Like they must have, and from the report, like no, his security tried to like get him out, but like nothing. So what, he wasn't able to communicate? Did they find a way to cut him off communication wise, and he wasn't able to communicate with anybody to do that? And so by the time they announced it, it's too late, right? Because again, outside of El Mencho, this is an important data point when we're talking about narco blockades. Outside of El Mencho, people think, oh, they do this for retaliation, and that's not necessarily true. The reason why they do narco blockades is not to retaliate. Except El Mencho, it's to stop the person from being captured, or if he manages to get captured, force the Mexican government to release them because of the violence. But if that target then gets captured and then gets sent over to Mexico City, at that point, it makes no sense to continue the narco blockades. Because now what they're going to try to do is go through the courts to either get his case thrown out or at least stop any extradition to the U.S.
By a judge.
Or, yeah. And we've seen that happen. We've seen that happen all the time.
Blow a judge heads off too.
And so that is when they do it, right? So the fact that Jardinero, there was no narco blockade is very, 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 very interesting. But I don't know if it's one of those situations, maybe we're reading too much into it and there's just information where like maybe they cut off his communications or it was really, he was caught by surprise. There might be other detail, but that was like, Omar Harfoot just announced it. Whoa. Now he could have just announced it to also say, oh, see, cartel members too late. You can't do anything. We already got him. So don't do the narco blockades because it makes no sense.
Right.
But again, but going back to Ivan Archibaldo, I mean, it's to your point, like, who does he have left? Let's look at the factions, right? For example, Los Yucos, one of the key factions of Los Chapitos.
Can we pull up Ivan? But yeah, go ahead.
Ivan Archibaldo. So, like, for example, you look, there's a term for all the Chapitos who switch side to the Mayos. They're called los volteados.
Los corteados.
Volteados. Yeah, the volteados, like the turnover. Like the guys who are the betrayers in a way, the guys who switch sides, who switch teams.
Rats.
So, yeah, right? So that's how those Chapitos call them. They say, we're fighting against Chapo Isidro, which is not to be confused with Chapo. Chapo Isidro is the Mesa Flores organization, the Guasave cartel, former BLO. We're fighting against los Mayos, Mayito Flaco now.
PLO?
Yeah, so the Beltran Levine organization, it used to be part of the Sinaloa cartel.
Got it.
And then they split off, huge violence. It was like, and then so he was kind of one of the last, not last, but he's like one of the most powerful ones of former BLO. And people.
Archibaldo? Sorry.
Like if you look at how the Treasury Department, the Justice Department, the State Department, they call like guys who are BLOs, they say, oh, Sinaloa cartel. It's like, no, that's not true. They're not. But, they don't, it's the Justice Department. They don't give a shit.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, well, he was once Sinaloa, always Sinaloa. Like
they're all Mexican.
But yeah, that's Ivan Archibaldo, right?
Oh, he looks like a fucking Bond villain.
So what's very interesting about Ivan, though, I think people underestimated him a lot, right?
Yeah.
But I would say, so Los Chapitos, right, there's 4 remaining. Right, there was 4 originally. So Ivan Archibaldo and Jesus Alfredo are the 2 that are out, and then you have Ovidio Guzman and Joaquin Guzman.
And those are the sons.
Then those are the others. Those are the sons that are in the U.S. And Ivan Archibaldo and Jesus Alfredo are the ones that are here. Okay. Ivan Archibaldo is the undisputed leader of Los Chapitos, and the thing is, and I told this in Canarino shows, like he has absolute loyalty with his members. Like if you look at Chapito propaganda and social media pages and messaging pages, they love this man to death.
Why?
I think he became the heir of El Chapo. And El Chapo had this gravitas, right? This image that, interestingly enough, Ivan was able to capture that. Mm-hmm. Very
aura.
powerful.
He's got aura.
Right, exactly. You know who doesn't have it, though? Jesus Alfredo. If you want to, I don't know if you can look up Jesus Alfredo. So it's Jesus Alfredo, same, Guzman Salazar. Jesus Alfredo is like the least charismatic human being I've ever. No, it's not. It's the one with
in
that
the
picture,
red,
with the white. That's like his latest, more accurate. That's it. This
guy don't have Riz.
No, man. Like,
how do you become a fucking drug lord if you don't have Riz?
I find it more likely that this man is going to defect to the U.S. and never take over Los Chapitos.
Is going to defect to the U.S. in what was the second part of that?
Then take over Los Chapitos.
Okay, I thought you said something.
But it's very interesting because now there's a lot of reporting that Ivan Archibaldo is in negotiations with the U.S. to turn himself in.
Ooh, that's interesting.
That's very interesting
because they already got a lot of the Chapos in custody.
Like, look at the factions. Like the only key, like if you look like okay, they have. I'm just gonna throw names so don't like Los Cascos. Okay, sure. They're very small, kind of like, all right, but not. The biggest one they have maybe left is a guy named Rene 00. Rene 00. Dude, that guy.
Hard name.
Rene, RENE 00. Rene
Bad
00.
guy, great name.
So that dude is like, I don't know how many times he switched sides. He's like the least reliable person you can imagine. You know, like the whole mafia honor. Like that guy doesn't believe in that.
He's Michael Cohen.
He doesn't. Perfect.
Yeah.
That is the example I was looking for. The amount of videos that the Chapito social media pages release on fighters belonging to Rene 00 fighting in Mexico, in Sinaloa, it's like, okay, so that's all you guys have left. Them and Los Cascos. But the Cascos are very interesting. And then under the Cascos, I think they're called Fuerzas Especiales 81. So the 81st Special Forces. I think that's their full name. What is this? Oh, okay, no. Put like the actual number, not like zero, like the 00 number.
Got it. So 00.
Okay. Yeah, and let's see.
And you want it on Twitter?
Yeah, so for example, that...
What's the chicken?
Okay, so
Is that Los Pollos Locos?
no, that's El Gallo, the CJNG symbol.
Oh shit.
So the pizza Los Chapitos, Chapizza, so they're pizza, and then they had that. So that is an image.
Can we show that? Is that going to get us?
I don't think so. Okay. I mean, it's a car on
a
fire.
little bit of fire. Come on. They got fire in Pakistan.
So that image is an AI generated image that shortly, when there was rumors before the CJNG Chapito alliance was officially announced, you started to see some narco message in some social media channels reporting that there was an alliance. That was the one that AI generated. They probably went to ChatGPT's like, give me a rooster with the fucking pizza. And then that's what they called it. Fuerzas Especiales Unión, FEU. And that's the image that they use. Wow. So within that, it's Chapito CJNG. And in those Chapitos, really right now, it's like the main one is René, which is these guys. Like these are the guys, right? Like that's them shooting it up, right?
Nice.
But it's like, I mean, I would have to look at the exact comment, but I'm pretty certain that's like the one. But it's like, really? That's your guy? The guy who switched side 50 million times? That's who you're reliant on? And what's actually very interesting, last week there were rumors, and I've talked to some other cartel observer accounts, really reliable, that are like adamant, like, no, René entered into a ceasefire with los Mayos. And it's because he was fighting a lot in southern Sinaloa. And that he entered into a ceasefire with los Mayos. What's interesting of that, if that's the case, the Mayos didn't enter into a ceasefire with all los Chapitos or all of Sinaloa, just with him. So although René is still Chapito, he's not going to go above. If this ceasefire is true, he's kind of been like, all right, Ivan, you're gonna have to fight them on the north on your own. I'm done fighting, right? And so again, it goes back to who does Ivan have left, and that's a problem. And I think that's why the reporting that he's considering turning himself in is gaining traction. I think the Los Angeles Times also reported on that, which is very interesting, which again, wouldn't be surprising. I can tell you right now, Ivan has been almost captured so many times. He's like his father. He's really good at escaping. Very, very effective. But going back to your question about why, he was like of all the leaders, he was like the low-hanging fruit compared to Mencho and compared to Mayo. Now, Mayo, you're right, was a unilateral U.S. operation. So you can't.
Yeah.
But El Mencho was done by the Mexicans. Let me get this clear. But there was a very interesting report from Reforma that indicated that Claudia Sheinbaum was not informed about the operation to get El Mencho until it was well underway.
Kept her in the dark.
And I believe it.
Why do you believe that one?
Because I think how these operations generally work is do not underestimate or underappreciate the power that the U.S. have in what is called vetted units in Mexico.
Vetted units.
So basically, let's say, like, there's a great Reuters report, actually, that lays it out from the CIA vetted unit in Mexico, right? It's great. Read it. It's phenomenal. And basically, once you read that, what you understand is, so like, say, the CIA, the military, FBI, DEA, HSI. Actually, if you look at HSI's, like, Twitter handle, you put, like, vetted unit and search, they'll say, Mexico sees this, and it's through a vetted unit. Like, they throw that all the time. How these vetted units work is they're basically, vetted by the U.S., trained, equipped, paid, all the. Actually, this is the one, right? Oh, look, Pernicious Propaganda. By the way, great account. Follow them. Love them.
Wait, I haven't seen that one before.
But so these are. Remember when I said OSINT?
Yeah.
They are an OSINT account. They are.
You know this guy?
We talk. Well, it's actually three.
Oh, it's three.
It's three.
Do you know them personally?
No. Most of the people in Cartel land, I don't know personally. We all chat regularly, but no. So
you guys got to do like a Cartel meetup or something.
Well, actually, we've had him on our podcast. One of the team members, Joe from Pernicious Propaganda, has joined our podcast. Our
Is he located down there?
No. I don't believe so. I don't know. But just quickly, like the vetted units, like that's the thing that I was trying to focus on. But when I was going to OSINT, the reason why he's like a true believer because he does I hate doing geolocations, but like he does like actual, like, here's a video, so I'm going to geolocate this.
Using the background.
And all that. And so then I'm a manager of geo-confirmed cartel map. So
geo-confirmed cartel map.
Yeah. So geo-confirmed is another great OSINT tool where it's like they have all the geolocations. So Russia, Ukraine, Iran, Israel, Syria, you name it. There's a cartel one. And so they have all these videos and images where if it's geolocatable and you geolocate it with evidence, they have it on a map with the date and everything. And so you can kind of track.
Oh, that's cool. So, Deef, this is basically like
So
our monitoring the situation, and he's the one creating the situation.
So go to Cartel. Scroll. So on the left side, you see where it says Cartel map?
Yeah.
Scroll down. I think you went up. There you go. Click on Cartel map. And now on so on the bottom, you see the bar. I haven't updated it. Sorry, geo confirmed. I'm really sorry. I will update it soon. Grab the left purple and go all the way to the left. All the way.
Yo.
And now zoom out.
What the fuck?
So these are all the events, and they're color coded based on the cartels or
This
the government.
is you doing this.
No, no. Pernicious propaganda does 99%. I'm just the guy who says approved, and I just added it into the system. Like that's
Looks good.
Look good, guys. Added. So like absolutely godlike work. Let me show you another one about OSINT on if I may. I'm going to give you the account.
Do whatever you want.
Let me do
Your
this.
show. Let's go.
Let me give you another one. So the other account, look up HEARST.
You know what the best part? I was
The BB, the third one, that one. Okay.
Is this another one that
Another great cartel account.
the inputs to this?
No. She does bios that are insane. Like just scroll down. I'm not even like scroll down like that.
Oh, this is what I need in my life, because this is actually the funny part about doing the cartel content, because it's always like Spanish words and other stuff. Every time I have in one of you guys after like 2-3 months, I'm like, I'm a blank slate again. Wait, which one is which? You know, this whole.
So she does
fucking
Spanish and English. She does Spanish. Her website. She actually has a website. It's on her link. Like go if you want to go back. Go to her. It says Narco Chronicles. And click on one of these guys.
Oh, she's got like the flow chart. Yeah.
Oh, and she has, so one of her, I love one of her flow charts from October. She has all of Sinaloa and all the Chapitos and Mayo's plaza bosses identified. She got DCMA by an account who was trying to take, she's influential because bullshit accounts in Mexico were trying to DCMA her work and say she didn't have, because they were like, oh, she didn't have copyright.
Copyright for what?
For her work.
To put up a criminal biography?
on Twitter, because Twitter would take her down all the time. So
put up a biography of a criminal.
Because these images, you see the black and that, you see that's her fucking form. If anybody sees that, that's her format. She deserves the credit, and people steal it like motherfuckers.
That's crazy.
So she's another great account. So Pernicious Propaganda, Geo-confirmed Cartel.
Are we following these accounts, Steve? I want to make sure we have.
And then, so in general, Borderland Beat is a phenomenal news organization. I know a lot of the reporters. No, just Borderland Beat. Sorry, just not general. Sorry, Borderland Beat. I hope they Borderland Beat. These guys are like really great reporters. I talked to a lot of them. So like Waso, Sol, Prendido, Itzel, Ivan. So AIC 03. That's another one that's a phenomenal one. There's another one that's oh my God. I'm like, hold on, give me a second. Cruz is another great one. He has a great Telegram channel as well with a lot of sources and information. Cruz is really good.
This is huge, because this is actually a huge problem with this space, because it's so dangerous down there, and because obviously...
Here, look this one up, and I'm going to show you why. So pull it up, and I'm going to put... You got to click on this map.
Right, but because like they're so wild west to the wild west nth degree down there, finding people who actually know what the fuck is going on is so difficult. So this is great.
Okay, so click on the Google Map link. Scroll, yeah. So now do me a favor, go on the left and just click the crimes to the third one. Click unclick that, and now zoom in. So this is the most accurate cartel territorial control map you will ever find.
What makes it so accurate?
Because this guy, so you remember what the geo-confirmed I showed you?
Yeah.
And then he talks to other accounts and people. And then based on all that, he literally goes into Google Map and updates his regulars saying where's the territories that they control. So the colors are all different cartel territorial controls. So, for example, That's red is CJNG. That right there is CJNG. And then the lines denote like all the alliances and conflicts that they have.
Whoa.
So you can so for example, go to what we were talking about Rene. So funny. So you know how I found him, I kid you not, on Reddit. He's like, hey, I'm making this. What do you guys think? Dude, I was just like, dude, you're amazing. I need you on X, like now, please come to X. I am begging you, and I will retweet the shit out of you and endorse you. Because do you know how hard this is? Like he goes in based on pernicious propaganda, geocomfort. The other one who does a lot of great work is Halipon. Halipon is another great
JAL?
No, HALIP, and I think it's a 0N, Halipon. He also does a lot of geoconfirmed and geolocation as well. But then they go there and then they update all this. And then if you click, you can click on any of these and they'll show you like the different factions within and the region. Like
damn.
So like, see all there in the left.
What a mess Guadalajara is. Oh my God.
So so when I first created, my account, if you were to ask me what my end goal was that like a lot of these things you're seeing now. I wanted a geoconfirmed cartel map, somebody who had a live map like this. You know, Hearst just been kicking ass way before I existed, and she does an amazing it's like, okay, we got to get them the what they deserve, like the credit they deserve, because I know for a fact that's Caliponi, another great cartel account. Cruz is another one. Ivan AIC, like there's so many that they do so much great work, and these are just. A lot of them are more kind of like in some, a lot of them are bilingual, obviously English and Spanish, but a lot of these are more kind of the English things. But like that's what he does, right? Like pernicious propaganda was talking about the geoconfirm and location.
Yeah, look, he's got the funeral of guys who were in the fucking El Mencho raid.
So like that, so that's kind of the network, right? It's like, okay, let's find the videos, let's post them, then people then they'll go, okay, let's geoconfirm it, and they can update his map. Right. Hearst can be like, okay, who's who in the zoo and who's the new leaders and like that's just, and again, we don't get paid to do this.
Right.
None of them do. I wish they would. But you know what? Hey, Elon, let's pay the guys that freaking say trans people are going to do mass shootings 24/7 or like a bullshit. Oh, let me have my camera and do this for a second and say I'm a reporter because of that. And you're going to tell me the knowledge that you get from this, and they get no credit, and people steal their shit all the time. And even sometimes news organizations, some of them have standards and integrity. Others don't. They just straight up
a news organization without standards and integrity.
Some of them do.
That's not. I'm offended at.
Some of them do.
Come on.
I know that there's other accounts. For example, I do a lot of there's I actually have a lot of the military aircraft observers, like the true ones that have been doing it for decades. There's a lot of great military aircraft observers, and they're key because they track Mexican flights, U.S. flights, South America. And what's good about them is they know what normal is and what isn't. Because I can grab one image on flight radar, show it to you, and you'd be like, oh my God, we're going to bomb Iran tomorrow, bomb Mexico tomorrow because of this one thing. And it's like, no, that one thing has happened 200 times already. Like that's normal. Like, and that's where I think the OSINT, now I think people can understand my passion for OSINT because it's insane. It's an insane amount of work and dedication that people take time out of their days to do for no monetary benefit whatsoever, rather than just inform the people. Because then based on that, I can tell you like Rene Cerotero in southern Sinaloa, right, that he stopped. Now Chapitos have problems in the north, and so now he has to rely more on Los Guanos, which is the brother of El Chapo, Gente del Guano, who's fighting Chapo Isidro, one of the faction called El Músico, under Chapo Isidro, right?
Can we pull up the Chapo's current war on that map?
Yeah.
Quick? So that's actually really helpful.
I mean, if you want, I don't know if I can stand up there, and is there an ability?
Yeah, so we have camera 5. What would be best, just because we might be doing this a while, would be like if you really got to point something out, go up there real quick and then come back. But the best is like, let's just direct where it is, and Deef will be able to direct people.
So let's zoom out.
Okay.
And by the way, this is what I do. Like I've had so many of these. Like the reason why I love him is like, you know how easy I have like a small YouTube channel, like 8,000. But I just
down below.
And all I do is I get his map and then I talk about people. It's like, this is what it means. So because that's
Yeah.
what else do I need?
What else do you need?
What else do you need?
This is insane.
So go
Like,
up.
I wonder if someone like at Langley, well, I mean, they're in on it, but somewhere else that actually wants to stop the cartels, they're just like looking at this, like, why do we have jobs?
You know what's the beauty of OSINT though? Here's the beauty, because I'm somebody who's been in the intel, right? I've been on both sides. Let's say it frustrated me to shit, specifically Iran. Hey guys, here's this amazing intelligence report that lays out everything and all the answers and everything we needed. And I look at the classification as top secret, SI Gamma, no foreign FISA. And I'm like, all right, so how many people in our organization have access to this? 10. Okay, so what the fuck? What am I going to do with this?
Right.
Okay, I can tell the general. And then, it's like, what are we doing? But what I like about OSINT, it's unclassified. I can share this to everybody in the world. That's the thing where people why does OSINT matter? Because that's the way anybody can just grab this right now and just share it.
Well, this is where it's such a brave new world, and I'd love to be a fly on the wall in some of these top secret rooms in governments where they're where I'm sure this stuff runs into interference with what they may want to do with things. It's like people out there in their bedroom can get things that were unfathomable even 15 years ago.
And that goes back to AI. That's why we created, because do you know how much data gets pushed on a daily basis? It's literally that's why what is AI great at? Aggregation of large data sets.
Right.
And analyzing it like we have our app SitRep for everybody. And it's that's why we have it, because we're collecting from thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of data points constantly, and alerts get published, and it's all AI summary. You got the title, a summary, who, what, when, where, why, a historical context and analysis all the time. Boom, boom, because that's the future. As the internet continues to grow, there's going to always be more information than you're able to properly analyze yourself.
Noise.
Especially
so
for humans.
Much noise.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
But here's an interesting, I always do not ignore the noise. The noise is important too.
Oh, no, that's not what I meant. I meant there's so many important things happening at once that the attention can be directed wherever they want it to be. That's what I mean.
And you know what's in the cartel landscape? I told this, and because I've been on conferences and stuff like that, and I had this conversation. I tell them, how do I know if this one report is true? Especially it's hard. You know what I mean? It's okay. Even if I validated the source, I talked to sources. Some of them are cartel members. Some of them are people who live in the area. Some are people who have access. Right now, you're going into is it a first-hand source, second-hand source, or third-hand source? Right. Standard human. Anybody who's done human understands those terminology. And then source validation. But then there's another thing, which is what kind of OSINT and a large scale. It's the aggregate. Is it one or two, or is it dozens and 100 that are all saying kind of an aggregate thing? And that's when you can have a better understanding, okay, who's winning or losing or what's going on in a situation, But to your map, to go there, so if you see that yellow, pure yellow?
Yep.
Okay, so you can scroll in on there. Okay, so this is Sinaloa, right? So what's very interesting is this is the Chapo Isidro, right? Uh-huh. Again, not to be confused with El Chapo, but Guasave Cartel Mesaflores organization. He has an alliance with Los Mayos, the Mayito Flaco.
Right.
Right. And so he's doing a lot of fighting in northern Sinaloa. So I'm just going to stand up to point. Sorry, 1 second.
You're good.
So these two right here, specifically this, right? So right here. All right. So that is El Chapo's brother. Gente del Guano.
That's him?
That's the brother, yes.
Man, it looks like him.
He's also very good at it. I don't know what it is in the Chapo family that they're very good at escaping. They got that locked down. So
he doesn't look like he's fast.
No, he's not. But so Chapo Isidro, who has an alliance with Mamayos, he is engaged in a very heavy battle right now for that region, which is highlighted, which is Gente del Guano.
How big is that region?
Very small. I mean, Actually, so what's very key, you see that cluster of little emojis and symbols down there?
On the left.
No, that one right there. That's Badiraguato, Sinaloa. You know why Badiraguato is important?
No.
El Chapo was born there. The El Chapo, the one in the guy who founded.
So this is like the Corleone.
This is their hometown.
Yeah.
So can you imagine if Chapo Isidro managed to seize the town, or Badiraguato, where El Chapo was born, which there's a lot of indications he might already be there, but the psychological blow for the cartel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Actually, it's funny because in the other town is called La Tuna in Sinaloa.
La Tuna?
La Tuna, like tuna.
Like the fish.
Yeah. So La Tuna, Sinaloa is actually, there's a mansion that used to belong to El Chapo's mother. So Ivan's grandmother. That has already been kind of like, we've seen videos of Chapo Isidro members already like in the mansion. They actually before drop bombs using drones. They'd like drop explosive devices on the,
shit.
yeah. She's dead. She's dead.
She's not still with us.
But it was this, it's the symbol, right? The symbology of it. Like don't discount the power of propaganda and symbology in cartel landscape.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's everything.
So Chapo Isidro, one of his key faction he has is called El Músico. They're fighting Gente del Guano, and one of Gente del Guano's key allies is called Los Calabazas. They actually use the pumpkin, like the Halloween pumpkin emoji. Calabazas, pumpkin, so that's the emoji they use. Calabazas used to belong to Chapo Isidro, and then they broke out. So within the Sinaloa cartel civil war, this is kind of one of the main battles that's going on, right? Because we all talk about the Mayos and Los Chapitos. This is another one that I think gets ignored a lot. And it's actually very, very key important in what's going on. So the purple is Mayo, the Mayos.
Yep.
And then kind of like, if you zoom out, it's kind of the same color, but like that over in Culiacan, like a little bit south, that like cyan blue right there. Yeah. So that's Chapitos, right? And you can see they have the Chapitos right there. And then you zoom out. Now, and on the southern part, that's where I'm talking about. Sorry, in the south, this is Rene. Like Rene's right there.
More? Can we zoom out a little more? So the Mayos have a significantly larger region, but that's a lot of mountainous, rolling hills and stuff. Whereas it seems like the Chapitos, being towards the shore, are more urban areas.
Correct. That's Anyway, but even in some of the areas so in the south, like Mazatlán, like there's still mountainous area because if you keep on going down, if you keep on going south, now this is Nayarit. This is Xcaluscan New Generation Cartel. This is his Jardineros. That right there in Nayarit, and that's Jardineros territory. That he's
was.
Right.
Yeah.
That was his territory. But that's why when the alliance was announced, El Jardinero was one of the key members who sent fighters there, and it was suspected that Ivan El Jardinero already had a long personal relationship before the alliance was announced, and that within the CJNG construct, Jardinero was the conduit for Los Chapitos. And then through El Jardinero is how El Mencho agreed on the alliance, because specifically to go after, as you show, the Mayos. Now in the purple, the within this, you have in Durango. You see there Durango. They're loyal to the Mayos, but the cartel there, you can call them the Mayos, but it's really Los Cabreras, and they have an absolute control. Near absolute control of Durango. The irony of the situation, or really not, Durango is considered one of the safest states in Mexico. But the reason why is because there's one cartel that controls it.
Devil you know.
Right. So even the Mexican government and the Durango government are like, how much do we really want to go after the Durango?
Right.
But why is Sinaloa one of the most violent states? Because now you have multiple cartels battling each other out.
Because you took out the leadership. And this is the age-old question. It's a question with organized crime. It's a question with government leadership. And maybe those are the same thing. But, you cut the head off the snake. Does it grow 10 heads or is the snake dead?
That's kind of the Kingpin strategy, right? And I mean, it depends. Some of it's so how I would answer this question is, and I said this in multiple other interviews, who are you addressing that question for? Mexico or the U.S.?
Let's start with Mexico. It's their territory.
Right. So Mexico probably, more than likely, if you kill a kingpin, violence would go up.
Mm-hmm.
Not always. But I
think we've seen that.
We've seen that a couple of times. So it's a good historical. So for Mexico, that's a problem because they don't. What's Mexico's number one security concern? It's not the drugs per se; it's security. Uh-huh. So that's why in those Durango, for example, there are many aspects of it. We don't want the
we don't want bodies.
We don't want bodies.
Right.
So let's take a step back. But from the U.S. perspective,
drugs.
And now there could be an impact not only if you decapitate a leader, but if they start fighting each other.
Because then they're focused on fighting rather than the business, so the volume goes down.
So who was, Los Chapitos was one of the main pushers of fentanyl into the United States.
Yeah, we've talked about that before.
And so very interestingly that the amount of fentanyl that was seized across the border dropped shortly after the Sinaloa Cartel Civil War started.
And when did the Civil War officially start?
September 2024.
Okay. Yeah, because there was also I just had him Ben Westhoff as well, who wrote the book Fentanyl Inc., which is probably the greatest book ever written on like the fentanyl crisis. He wrote it back in 2019. He's continued to work on the story over the years. And part of the reason that there's been such a drop is because there have been discussions with China where Xi Jinping has actually played some ball on stopping, what's the term for it, Deef?
The precursors?
The analogs and the precursors for fentanyl, and there's been a direct correlation with that. So maybe it's a combination of both, but there was obviously serious cooperation, not just cooperation, business alliances between Chinese creators and cartel smugglers.
I don't know. Are you going to have him back anytime soon? Because there's a key individual that I think you guys should look up. Actually, if you can for a second, look up Brother Wang.
Brother Wang.
Brother Wang.
It's another hard name.
Right there.
Zidong Zhang, aka Brother Wang.
I mean, let's see in images. I think they should have an image. He's in the U.S. already. Yeah. So that guy, the top left, the guy in the top left. Yeah, that's him. So this guy,
Se busca.
This guy, to your point, there's two aspects of your analyzing cartels from as holistic that you need to analyze the Chinese component of it. It's the chemical precursor route, right? And that's what Brother Wang was, and the money laundering, right? That's the other aspect where the Chinese play a key role. Brother Wang was so influential that he had no problem dealing with both the Sinaloa cartel and Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Both sides knew he was dealing with the other side, and they didn't touch him. And if anything, he was first captured. He was put in house arrest, and one of the cartels went in and was like, hey, let me get you out. Come on.
Oh, in Mexico. And they got him out.
He's
like the Michael Jordan of fentanyl.
And then eventually he tried to escape, try to fly back to China, and ironically, they kind of like, I think he was in he flew through Russia. Russia's like, yo, this is a fake passport, dude. Now we're deporting you back because he was flying from Mexico, he went to Cuba to Russia, Russia to China. And then Russia's like, this is fake, get the hell out of here. And then when he went back to Cuba's like, wait, you have a red notice on you from Interpol, from the Mexicans. And then eventually they said, okay, you're out. And then they sent him to the U.S. So the U.S. got him.
Poor guy.
But he was powerful enough to deal with both cartels, and not a single one dared to touch him. And they both knew he was dealing with the other side.
What made him so powerful?
Because how are you going to get your chemical precursors from?
He was the only guy that could do that.
I mean, not the only guy, but if you already have a well-established relationship, it's a business.
It's a business.
It's like cocaine, man.
That's right.
The cartels don't fight in Colombia.
Right.
They don't fight in Colombia. Like the Mexican cartels, they don't fight in Colombia.
They fight in Mexico.
They fight in Mexico.
Right.
And they maybe there's a you can make an argument there's a proxy war in Ecuador that they
Ecuador has been a little crazy.
But in Colombia, for the most part, they're like, nah, this is where we get our cocaine. Come on, it's business. And it's very interesting. Let's look at the Sinaloa Cartel Civil War. Name me one place outside of Mexico where the Sinaloa Cartel Civil War is going on, because it isn't.
Right.
And what's very interesting, and this is a trend that I'm glad people are starting to pick up, and it took the U.S. AFRICOM commander, the commander of Africa, to say this in the Senate briefing, or I don't know if it was to the House or to the Senate, but he said, we're starting to notice Mexican cartels set up drug labs in Africa, like in South Africa, Nigeria, both Jalisco New Generation Cartel and Sinaloa Cartel. It's like, I mean, that has been a trend that's been going on for a very long time, where, you had the drug trafficking, right, from like cocaine and all that, methamphetamines, et cetera, produced in Mexico or South America and then shipped overseas. Or now what they're doing is they're trying to produce it either even in Africa or even in Europe specifically. Mm-hmm. And so you're seeing an increase of drug labs being seized outside of South America to Mexico, because and so what they'll do is they'll recruit a lot of like chemical students in Mexico after they graduate. The cartels say, hey, we'll pay you big bucks. Come help us make drug labs in South Africa, which recently had a major drug lab bust. That the AFRICOM commander said that the U.S. is able to pass intelligence. Actually, we were talking about fentanyl being dropped. We're getting flooded by cocaine, like insane. Like it is like
in America,
the world. But especially in America, to the point where the price of cocaine is dropping from a wholesale perspective.
Yeah.
And so this month, we had what is possibly the largest cocaine seizure in history off the coast of Spain. Around 30 to 40 tons of cocaine was shipped.
30 to 40 tons. That's enough for the club.
Off the coast of Africa on a boat.
Yeah.
The Spanish Guardia Civil.
Pulling it up right now. This was very recently?
Like May 1st. I think it was it was May 1st.
All right, May 26, or May 2026, record-breaking 30-ton seizure. In early May 2026, Spanish police carried out the largest cocaine bust in European history, intercepting a ship carrying 30 tons of cocaine. The Comoros flagged freighter named the Arconian was intercepted by the Guardia Civil between May 1st and May 4th, 2026. The ship was stopped in international waters off the coast of Western Sahara near the Canary Islands while traveling from Sierra Leone to Libya. The haul was valued at over 812 million euros or $956 million. All 23 crew members were arrested, including 17 Filipinos and 6 nationals from the Netherlands and Suriname. The drugs were packed in 1,279 bundles. Authorities also discovered firearms and ammunition on board. You do have to protect your shipment, obviously. But that's a whoa.
So we're losing the cocaine, and I mean, you can look at like South America, all the cocaine trade and everything that happened. Like, it's just like the amount of record seizures is like, oh my god. And the argument that I would love to, like the cocaine, fentanyl. I would even marijuana, like that whole drug piece is like in a very, I think, interesting dynamic from a drug trade because it goes back to the U.S. That's what we're concerned about, and the kind of the violence because. Those cabreras in that map of Durango, that purple map right there, they have huge meth labs in Durango. Like enormous amount of meth is produced in Durango and then smuggled in. So can you zoom out for a second? To the U.S. Yeah, to the U.S. If you zoom out, okay, so you see that black map, that black area? Yeah. Right? Okay, so that's CDN. That's the Northeast Cartel.
Why do they have like a straight line?
Okay, so that's the Monterrey to Eagle Pass, and then a lot of that is the human smuggling, because CDN is one of the. I think a lot of people, like when we're talking about human smuggling in Mexico to the U.S., people automatically assume it's all cartels, and it's like a lot of it is more like family or local criminal networks that then pay a fee to the cartels. But CDN is one of the cartels that's like no, they're actively involved in human smuggling. Much more so than others. And that line, because Monterrey, they get a lot of the migrants and then they push it up to Eagle Pass. But what I was getting at, that purple and black, right? So Mayos and CDN have an alliance, a business alliance. And there's even more suspicions that they're also an alliance fighting against Los Chapitos in Sinaloa. The CDN has sent members down to Los Chapitos to fight. But a lot of the meth that is produced in Durango and a lot of the drugs is produced in Durango then gets pushed to CDN, who then smuggles into the U.S. Because CDN, they're what I would call like a border cartel. They don't control the drug distribution centers in Mexico. They don't even control the ability to get drugs, cocaine from South America. But where they make their money is because they control the border areas where they can smuggle it into the U.S. And so that business alliance that they have with those Mayos is very important.
Now, you said it was early 2024 when the Chapitos civil war breaks out, and then
September 2024.
September 2024 after El Mayo was and we'll talk about that too. I want to come back to that. But, that's when the fentanyl decreases because the Chapitos were moving a lot of that into America. And this is like kind of the age-old question with this. Why did the cartels decide to emphasize so much fentanyl? And I ask this for 2 reasons. Number one, it's a lot cheaper than some other drugs, so there's less money to be made on it. And number 2, it is the most severely damaging and kills a lot of the clientele. So why did they make this bet when it was only going to?
Because it's so easy to manufacture. It's so easy to make. Okay, so let's look at all the drugs in comparison, right? You have, let's say, methamphetamines, cocaine, marijuana, and like in fentanyl, right?
Yeah.
Which fentanyl is not that hard. You don't need, for example, with cocaine and marijuana, plantations and this and that, and then you have to take care of it, and then you have to crop it, and there's only a certain amount of times you can, and then the other fentanyl you just make, done, do. Package, send. And you can charge a shit ton of money to do it, right? So it's funny you asked this question. One of the things I'm starting to do an initial research, I'll just say it here because if somebody wants to take my idea and run with it, I'll love it. I would not discount the possibility that the reason why there was a push to fentanyl was that the Mexican cartels weren't in a position to adjust their business model when marijuana started to become legal in certain U.S. states. Now, let me make something clear. Drug cartels, the legalization conversation, don't mix it with the cartel violence. Those are two, there's some overlap, but it's completely separate, right? But what was very interesting, if you look up like Mexican cartels, illegal marijuana farms in the U.S., right, cultivation in the U.S., and you look, Mexican cartels, like, okay, that's the media being lazy, number one, because there's no such thing as a Mexican cartel, like which cartel? You got to give me a name. Number two, don't mix up Mexican crime syndicate or like the Mexican mafia with the cartel. Those are like those separate, right? Separate. Like in gangs, etc. Who really controls the illegal cultivation of marijuana in the United States from a criminal syndicate perspective is the Chinese triads, right? Yes. Which is interesting because if you look at Mexico, the Mexican cartels control the marijuana trade in Mexico, which is illegal. If anything, funny enough, Los Chapitos and other Mexican cartels wanted marijuana to be legal because they would have a monopoly in that market. They actually advocated inside of Mexico they wanted to see if they can get it legal because they would control that market.
Right, because they already have it. Yeah.
But the question then is, why in the U.S., why is it that the Chinese triads and the crime syndicates were the one who took control of the illegal marijuana production and not the Mexican cartels? Because you look at a graph, you can look at some graphs, you can look at like marijuana drug seizures on the border, and you can look at fentanyl drug seizures on the border. It's kind of like, like this. And that's the question that I have. Is it that the Mexican cartels, because they weren't able to, maybe they didn't even want to, they're like, it's not worth it for us. We don't want to try. Let the Chinese have it. Let somebody else have it. Some of them do.
And they made a lot of business partnerships with them too to do that.
And is there some cartels that have maybe some marijuana production? Sure. And yeah, of course. But is it their main business, drug trafficking? No. And I think that's why. And I think they said this is very easy to make, very easy to produce, very easy to ship and smuggle. So that's what we're going to do, regardless of the damage it did. Now, I would say that I think the political pushback that got to them and then the Civil War and all that, that's now why we're seeing them refocus their efforts on cocaine. And then methamphetamine as well. But what is very interesting is we're seeing a shift in methamphetamine productions, although it's still happening in South America and Mexico. A lot of that is now being shipped over to Europe and Africa.
Why is that? Because then they got to bring it back.
Well, but you're avoiding oversaturated routes through the Atlantic and the Pacific that are controlled by that have a lot of intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies controlling those routes, right? So because if you're sending, that's how, look, they seized 30 tons of cocaine in Africa, right? That's because of U.S. intelligence. So they probably tracked that because it didn't start in Sierra Leone for the report. That came from somewhere in South America. Now, what the AFRICOM commander highlighted is do not discount the West Africa drug trade route. And unfortunately, a lot of terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, JNM, the Al-Qaeda affiliate there, ISIS in the Greater Sahel, they kind of take a lot of money from that drug trade, and that's a huge problem. But the West Africa route to Europe is a key drug trade route as well. I track like a lot of hashish farmer, Moroccan drug trafficking organizations in Morocco who openly share videos on social media of them smuggling hashish and cocaine over to Spain and Europe.
You track it?
Yeah, actually there's one. Where's this guy at?
Sitting up in the middle of the night watching a boat.
I don't know I wonder if he got banned. Actually, that's a good question. Did he get banned?
There he is at the Strait of Gibraltar.
I wonder if I would have to see if he got banned. But there was and actually from a lot of the drug trade people, like he was like, oh yeah, he was very active. It looks like he might have turned it off because he would always post. But yeah, there's the Moroccan crime syndicate, huge in drug trafficking and their ability to kind of do that. So I think those are the type of conversations that the AFRICOM piece really opens up is the shift in drug trafficking routes. And there could be an intelligence reasons why they did that. They don't want the law enforcement to go after them. It could be a cost, right? It's just easier to set up shop there, produce it there, and then now we can ship it with less cost because now we can use normal trade routes and we don't have to use like the Narco submarines and da-da-da-da-da. And I think that's why. But that's been a trend that I've been seeing at least the last couple of years, that more and more drug labs are being seized in Europe. Like there was one, I think it was last year, mid to late last year in Poland. The Poland Special Forces seized a suspected Sinaloa cartel drug lab in Poland.
They're everywhere, man.
And what's interesting, to expand on the Sinaloa cartel civil war, is, again, this idea that the violence hasn't spread outside, right? CNN had a great report, and in some of the conversations I had with people on that was if you talk to Sinaloa cartel operatives in the United States, for example, they'll say, oh, that civil war, that's a Mexican thing. Like that does not impact us. We're not involved. We're still Sinaloa cartel. In Mexico, they might have a differentiating idea. In Mexico, we still view ourselves as Sinaloa. We're not involved in the violence.
That's strange.
And interesting. And I said, that is a very interesting dynamic, because if the Civil War was having an impact internationally, there would be two things we'd see. One, violence, number one. But number two, we would see, and we haven't really seen this, and we'll see if it is that, but CJNG then would absorb Los Chapitos drug trafficking routes.
Just because they're completely distracted with the violence?
No. If you're making the argument that, because if you're making the argument that the Civil War is also viewed internationally, you would see Chapitos drug trafficking routes being absorbed by CJNG because of the alliance. We're not seeing that.
Oh, okay.
We're not seeing that. And so it's very interesting that the violence is confined inside of Mexico and not in, let's say, Poland or Africa, where they're there. So that's another very interesting dynamic as well.
Yeah, and obviously, like, this all, as we alluded to, breaks out with the very strange capture of El Mayo, which periodically comes up on different episodes of this show, even coming up on 2 years later, because here you have a guy who operated as the other half of the cartel effectively. You had the El Chapo faction, you had his faction, and he's a total opposite. Old, more grandfatherly kind of dude living up in the hills, has a real iron fist on his operations and his power. And it was long suspected, not confirmed or anything, that there had to be some sort of deal or some sort of understanding or some sort of straight up like alliance between him and United States intelligence. And then you see him put on a plane where he is essentially like duct taped and said, fuck it, you're going to America. And he's met on the runway by all kinds of, obviously, American agencies and law enforcement, arrested, and we don't hear a fuck ton about it. Obviously, he's been going through hearings and stuff, I believe, here in New York. But like, that kind of came out of nowhere, and I still haven't gotten a straight answer from people. I don't know if there is one, to be clear, about what the hell happened there. As far as you can tell, though, you know, what's your best theory, or what information do you see or know that could say this is what it was? Either he was working with the U.S. or he wasn't.
From my understanding, he wasn't. He was just untouchable. That's why the U.S. didn't tell Mexico about this operation. If anything, the Mexicans were the one who were protecting him. So, like, in the 40 years since he was a drug trafficker, there was literally not a single time he was almost captured.
Why would the Mexicans protect him? Because he was better to deal with than Chapo?
Yeah. I mean, you can make the argument that Mayo was the real power of the Sinaloa cartel.
Yes, I've heard that.
Yeah, like, and I
Chapo's
would
the face.
I would fall within that realm. And if anything, I think I like how you said, you know, the older gentleman in the mountains. If one thing towards the later part of his life, Mayo specifically, he was much more interested in maintaining the peace. So anytime there would be factions of the Sinaloa cartel fighting each other. So, for example, there was Los Rusos were fighting Los Salazars, which are two factions of the Sinaloa cartel, you know, way back before the split happened. Like, and Mayo would personally get involved to try to stop it. And even to a point where he like kicked out Los Rusos temporarily. There was reporting that he kicked them out of the organization because they wouldn't bend to his will. And then the Rusos like, oh shit, okay. No. Because Los Rusos are still to this day part of the Mayos.
Interesting.
Right? The Russians are called. They're not affiliated with Russia or President Putin or anything like that. They just love to troll. And their leader's nickname is the Russian. So that's it. Actually, I can even show you in the map. So if we go from the map for a second. So
yeah, we're gonna use the shit out.
Dude,
of this
I anytime you have a guest that talks about cartels, by all means,
we're just gonna have this up.
So go all the way to the top left corner. You see that little purple strip that kind of goes down between the yellow, that like orange? Yeah. Now go left. You see that purple on the left of that, right there. Click that. It should say they're Los Rusos.
La Maiza?
No, further. Actually, let me see. He should be there.
That?
Right here.
Los Rusos are an armed wing of the Sinaloa cartel specifically aligned with Ismael El Mayo Zambada.
Yeah, so
they operate as part of La Maiza, the Mayo loyalist faction, and their main rival within the cartel are Los Chapitos, the sons of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman.
So they used to fight heavily against Los Salazars. Los Salazars used to belong to Los Chapitos, but then they formed their own group, which is that yellow. Now you see that yellow that brought right there. So if you click there, they broke off and they formed. And you can see the black. That's again Hearst's map. I mean Hearst's diagram on the top. They formed what's called the Independent Cartel of Sonora, which is Los Salazar, Los Paredes, y Los Cazadores. They all used to belong to Los Chapitos. So before the Sinaloa Cartel Civil War, the Mayo and Los Chapitos, this was a break that happened before that, where these three factions said, we're done with Los Chapitos, we're forming our own group. And so they loosely called themselves the Independent Cartel of Sonora, was a confederation. But Los Rusos used to fight heavily against Los Salazars. And then the Mayo was the one who said, hey, we need this peace. And even when this kind of violence happened over here with the Independent Cartel of Sonora, even Mayo was, that was Chapito problem, but he was still very interested in trying to maintain it. This is kind of what was going on. He already made it. Like, what else does he need? So I think he just knew a lot of Mexicans' dirty laundry, and he knew how to operate in a system to make sure he was untouchable, that even the Mexicans didn't want to go after him. And I think that's why during the Biden administration, they said, we're going to go after him. And they used Joaquin Guzman, the son, to do that. And I think the reasoning they were able to churn them is because they managed to extradite Ovidio Guzman, right, after the second Culiacanazo in 2023. What was very interesting is when the Culiacanazo happened and Ovidio Guzman was captured, the Chapitos felt betrayed that the Mayos did not respond. Because if you go back to Sinaloa, so scroll down, right? So that yellow area. Okay, so zoom in on so it's a little bit further down. Sorry, keep on going. Okay, so that where the yellow, and then that right there, Culiacan, where all the little center areas like the cyan. Go down, right there. Okay, so before this, so you see that yellow wasn't always that far out, but you can see towards the east of it and the northeast, like that's Mayo's territory, right? That's, for the most part, if you go 2 years back, for them, a little bit different, but for the most part, that's where it was. Like the Mayos were further in, and those Chapitos, as you said, kind of control the urban area. When Ovidio Guzman was captured and the Culiacanazo happened, where the Chapitos just went haywire and brought the city to violence, they wanted the Mayos to help, and the Mayos didn't.
That's a no-no.
And so my suspicion was the U.S. then was able to because Ovidio Guzman was in prison and they had conversations with him, they were like, Ovidio probably said, hey, we can help you get in Mayo. I can get my brother, Joaquin Guzman, who's within those Chapitos is absolutely irrelevant. He's an irrelevant figure. Less so than, even more irrelevant than Jesus Alfredo. And I think Joaquin Guzman was a sacrificial lamb. And then they managed to get him and to trick Mayo Zambada to get on a plane and fly him over to El Paso where he was arrested. And then his son took over, Mayito Flaco, Ismael.
Okay, I got to go to the bathroom real fast, but I want to talk about the sun when we get back. Yeah. And then there's a bigger picture there thing, too, that I want to get to and get your thoughts on. So we'll be right back.
Oh, good job.
It's funny. We were just talking off camera, so you know Nadu?
Yeah. I thought we were live. I didn't know that. But yeah, Jeff, he didn't remember you did this space. And
I kept hearing your voice, and I'm like, God damn, I've heard this voice before. It's because, on Twitter, you're like behind profile handles and whatever. There's a ton of people talking. But yeah, we did a space right after the Iran war broke out. I remember that now. It's funny.
And no, the Venezuela Maduro raid.
Yeah, but we were talking about both because this was right after Iran broke out. I remember.
Yeah, this. So Jeff, I've also been on his show. Great, he's
Jeff
great.
Knows his shit, man.
He knows a lot, and we've actually done where anytime something major happens in Mexico, like it'll be Jeff, Katerina, myself, just a quick, we gotta go live. So if you ever want to join us on the live, we just, the three of us, what's going on? And we did that for when El Mencho was killed. He did a breaking news live space on Twitter and YouTube, and we were all trying to react. I was trying to check the news and all that because it was just chaos. So
shout out Nadu. Nadu always finds a way to come up on these shows. He's the man. He's been on the show a couple times. Does a great job. But we were talking about El Mayo's son before we went to break right there. So he's been effectively in charge of that faction since his father, since the day his father was captured.
And that's very interesting how quickly he was able to consolidate control. Now, so here's the thing, right? When you're the up-and-coming leader, you obviously get in the position of power because the faction leaders coalesce around you. And they say, yes, we acknowledge you're going to be the leader. But if one thing Mayito Flaco has been very good at is saying, I'm not going to rule where I'm beholden to my faction leaders. My faction leaders are going to be beholden to me. I'm going to have the gravitas of my father. right? And I think he's getting there, and it's very interesting how his operational approach has been to just go on a warpath everywhere. Like he's not holding back. He's declared one, those Chapitos. He's increased his offensive operations against Jalisco New Generation Cartel in Chiapas, Zacatecas, Nayarit. You can even make the argument that in Zacatecas he's doing pretty well. There's very interesting dynamics there, and so that's where he's kind of been that figure, and he is getting to the point where he's also having that same. It's very interesting. Like again, it's like we were talking about the emojis. Or I don't know if we mentioned that before. Like, oh yeah, the Chapitos,
the pumpkin and all that. Yeah.
So it's very interesting. Before the Mayos were always that hat, right? The cowboy hat, and now it's the horse because that's his symbol. So everything now is kind of centered around the horse, and that's why when you see the watermarks of some of these videos, that's how you can tell where did that video get pushed from.
Right.
Is it a Chapito? Because it will put the watermark, and some of them have that. And so, like the famous one, like it's always the Mayo, there's one that's like the horse head with a cowboy hat, and then the horse is eating a slice of pizza, right? It's the trolling. And so that's kind of the things. But yes, you're starting to see, and I wouldn't even say starting, it's almost complete, where Maito Flaco has that absolute control. And if anything, even Los Cabreras, I've heard kind of reports that he was kind of upset with Los Cabreras because the Cabreras haven't been doing so well. One of their factions called Grupo Flecha.
Grupo Flecha?
Grupo Flecha, which is the arrow group, like the bow and arrow. So actually, that's their emoji. They have like a bow and arrow.
It's kind of hard.
Yeah, so they have not been doing so well. And so I think I've heard rumors of kind of his frustration with them, and, nobody's really going to challenge. So then the question then becomes, with Jalisco New Generation Cartel, which I know we can go after, with Mencho, that his stepson, O3, kind of took over. That's kind of what you see. But I would say Maito Flaco has absolute control over his organization.
Now, what I was thinking with the whole El Mayo thing, though, and this has been in my head before that even happened in 2024, but it's just a persistent thought since, with some people I've also talked with in the studio here, is where at least United States intelligence really stands on the cartels. And let me give you some context what I mean by that. So my friend Luis Navia was in here back in episodes 221 and 222, and he was effectively, it's very real, he was like, by the end of his career, like the chief smuggler for every cartel except the Asian ones around the world. And he was taken down an Operation Journey in Venezuela in 2000. It was like 15 different countries working on it, all kinds of shit. And so he, this is a guy who knew and touched pretty much everyone, knew Pablo Escobar, knew the leaders of the Mexican cartels, all these different things. And obviously he gives a great breakdown of that. And he's the kind of guy, like, he's helped with things, attacking the cartels with the government and stuff since then, like even after he was out of prison and everything. Like he enjoys being around it, I guess. And so there was a guy that I got connected to back then through him that was he's a CIA knock. And says he's not in it anymore, but that he's been in it for 50 years and now he's a part of a company that has 4 ex-intelligence guys that happens to show up in a lot of third world countries, and 6 months later, poof, new leadership happens in the country. So, you can do with that what you will. But this guy will talk to me on WhatsApp sometimes, and I'm not really sure what to think of it, but good dude, with me at least. But, his career, the story of his career is very telling to me because he was effectively doing a regular job, won't say what it was, on the West Coast, and he was dating the niece of a very, very high-placed, like the highest-placed cartel guys in Mexico. This is early days. So I guess like CIA was watching him, like, who the fuck is this guy who's fucking the niece of so-and-so? They see him going to Mexico, staying at the house sometimes, and they basically looked at him and they're like, this guy would make a great spy. So they went to him and they said, hey, we want you to work for us. You'd be a knock. You're going to be using your connections and eventually you're going to end up fully in Mexico so we can know what's going on and everything. And he was like, oh, hell no. Listen, I have no business, whatever, my girl's uncles are doing. Like, that's not my problem. I'm not going to be a rat and like take them down. And they're like, take them down? What do you mean no, we don't want you to take them down. Yeah. We want you to work with them. Yeah, and basically they were like, no, the point is not to stop this. We want to use this machine for all the other means that we want to get after. Long story short, he ends up down there for, as far as I can tell, it was like 20, 30 years, something like that. And you see story after story like this where intelligence services are operating within the cartels. And to be clear, their job is not to be the FBI and like make arrests. I understand that. But like, it doesn't seem like they're trying to stop these guys. So when you see something like El Mayo happen, do you not wonder if it's like a bigger picture, you know, really just a pawn on the board play so they can, maybe he wasn't playing ball on certain things that they wanted to do?
So let me ask this. What years are we talking about when this whole NAC and all that, more or less?
This guy would have been, for that role, as best as I can tell, he would have started in the 70s and he would have still been doing it in the 2000s, maybe into the early 2010s.
So I can tell you right now, and again, you can look at this Reuters reports about the CIA. The CIA is, if anything, especially now with this Trump administration, are going to, if they're not the lead, if they're not already, they're going to be the lead agency taking down these cartels. They are a key component. And I think there's people don't, I'm gonna use this. Like, for example, when I was deployed and when I was doing work in the company, like, yeah, we interacted with the CIA. Now, granted, I was an analyst, so we mostly talked to the analysts. Because, I do believe a lot of times it's like, it gets like over, I guess that whole secrecy thing is like, like everything is a secret squirrel. Everything is so mysterious and it's the CIA everywhere. And I just say to people like, I remember the first time I ever dealt with the agency, I remember thinking to myself, my first reaction was, because I was like a lieutenant, I was like, man, this is like The Office. What the hell?
Underwhelming.
Yeah. But just, now granted, analyst type of thing, but it was like, this thing, I do believe that the CIA, at least in the 70s, obviously their priority was communism. They didn't give a shit about it. They were like, oh, we don't, exactly, I'd agree with you. We, like the whole Iran-Contra, it was communism and all that. Now, there has been, even for a while, a fundamental shift in the prerogatives of the CIA in the Western Hemisphere, specifically with the Trump administration, where now the priority and the emphasis is stopping all of this, right? I mean, they have been, I would even make the argument that in many operations that led to the capture to the death of a cartel member, it came from information from the CIA.
But again, is that just them wiping what they view as a pawn off the board when the pawn gets annoying with how they actually want to do things and they can find someone better?
I mean, I guess that's the question then, though, is the argument the CIA is involved in the drug trade and they're trying to do it to make as much money as possible? Or is there other motives
I don't think it would be to make as much money as possible. There's better ways to do that. I've never thought of that angle. That wouldn't be what I would think. It would be for the intelligence sources. And I'll give you another example. I did have a knock sitting in that chair twice, Matthew Hedger, and it would be more recent years, who became a major league money launderer for the cartels at the behest of the CIA. And one of the things he did, he described it in detail here, about how he flipped a top 10 banker at a top 10 bank in a bar to launder money for the cartels. That's not really stopping the cartels. That's kind of assisting in the process.
And so that's and that from the development from intelligence sources, that's where the question now that we have, though, is that now, for example, especially with all these drone strikes that were going on, now that I would say, has that fundamentally changed from the directive to the agency? Possible. And I think because a lot of the operations, the Mayo one, 100%, like, there's a lot of interagency. I think one of the very interesting conversations, like if I'm a DEA guy,
Kiki,
I'm wondering and concerned about if my position now is my agency is redundant. Because the FBI is a lot more involved in a lot of this. Actually, the Mayo capture is not necessarily what, the CIA obviously plays a role, and they're playing a lot of role, especially in the vetted units. Do not underestimate CIA's Mexican vetted unit. Those guys do not play around.
Why?
They're the top of Mexico Special Forces. Like if you're going to look at like the Mexico SEAL Team 6 and Delta, it's the Mexican Special Forces vetted unit by the CIA. I'm telling you, this Reuters report, read it. It's phenomenal. And if you read that, you actually, I don't know, you could do like Reuters, CIA, Mexico. Maybe they have to search it to find it. And you read it and it lays out, holy shit, how this Mexican unit, through information through the CIA that they get, are actively going against a lot of these people, right? And it kind of undermines that argument of, well, why do we need to do unilateral operations if we could just have our vetted units do it? Right. I think, is this it? Yeah.
Inside the CIA's secret fight
And they've been doing this for a
against
while.
Mexican drug cartels. Working with special Mexican Army and Navy units, the CIA for years has been running covert operations to hunt down Mexico's most wanted narcos. A Reuters investigation finds among the captures a son of cartel chief Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Let's scroll down and read some of this. In January 2023, the Mexican government deployed helicopter gunships and hundreds of soldiers into rural Sinaloa to capture Ovidio Guzman Lopez, the son of the imprisoned cartel kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. In the hunt for the young capo, the mission's architects worked hand in glove with a powerful American backer, the Central Intelligence Agency. Ahead of the raid, America's premier spy agency leveraged its vast eavesdropping apparatus to surveil the communications of Guzman's associates to locate him in his mother's hometown in the western Sierra Madre Mountains, according to 4 former intelligence and law enforcement sources. CIA analysts assembled a detailed dossier known as Targeting Package on El Chapo's flashy son. The CIA was helped by intel from a member of Ovidio's circle who had security flipped. 3 of the sources added. Let me just go a little more deep. Finally, to carry out the arrest itself, the Mexican Army deployed an elite unit that was trained, equipped, and vetted by the CIA. A dozen current and former U.S. and Mexican officials said a Reuters investigation has found that the CIA has been running covert ops in Mexico for years to track down the country's most wanted drug traffickers. The secret, the U.S. spy agency works closely with special narco hunting units inside the Mexican military. With the permission of the Mexican government, the CIA gives training and equipment to these outfits, as well as financial backing for activities like travel. The U.S. spy agency also screens their members with U.S.-administered polygraph tests, which is why the groups are often called CIA-vetted units. Today, there are at least 2 such CIA-vetted military units operating in Mexico, in addition to the Mexican Army group that nabbed Ovidio. There's a special Mexican Navy intelligence outfit, according to 8 current and former Mexican and U.S. officials.
So I say that, right? And then obviously not that's why we were talking about the vetted where we saw pernicious propaganda, like HSI has one, FBI, DA. FBI, from my understanding, from my reporting, and I posted this shortly after because I was reached out to sources, the capture of Mayo was really the who deserves all the credits, FBI.
Why is that?
They were the ones who led it, from my sources in my conversation.
So they had like an inside.
So they had a way to get inside. Yeah, they had a way to inside talk to Joaquin Guzman and use Joaquin Guzman to turn in on Mayo, right? This one, obviously, this is talking about Ovidio Guzman's with the CIA and how they do it. Now, to your overall point, because I was like thinking while you were reading that, let me put it this way. Let's imagine, again, I'm making this scenario up, but let's imagine you're the CIA, right, director, and you have a priority, obviously, to get sources inside of China. You want to know what Xi Jinping's thinking, what they're talking about. And you find maybe, I don't know, one of Xi Jinping's, I'm going to make it up, nephews, is hugely involved in money laundering for cartels.
That would be a great find.
And would you think that the CIA's priority then is going to try to get him to turn him over, or to find a way to make him successful, make him into a source, and find ways to leverage that? Because you overall power, is to get info on Xi Jinping, right?
Second one.
Yeah. Now, we can blast them, got it. But in the end, welcome to the reality of the world of just like, well, it's Xi Jinping we're talking about, right? Now, granted, maybe this is where the administration comes.
Oh, I'd be okay with hold on a minute.
Yeah.
I'd be okay with this.
Yeah.
Because that is like, forget all the bullshit CIA does. That's actually the job, is to cultivate the intelligence in an effort to actually stem this from happening.
And I think a lot of these sources and these acts, like you would say, is like they're not going to know why.
Yeah.
And then that's where they're just a little, that's the pawn of the game. Now, can you make the argument of Mayo in some areas and some aspects in public square, especially in the Cold War now, where sure, I'm not debating that. We're not going to get the full picture. But as this report laid out, and oh, by the way, when we were talking about the CNN report where they were doing unilateral assassinations, the New York Times report is the one that they didn't do the assassinations, the Mexicans doing it through the support of CIA, also shows that they're a key component of the cartel fight. And that goes to my point about the DEA. You have the FBI being the lead agency that captured Mayo. The FBI doing a lot. Ryan Weddings, right? Who was the one who announced Ryan Weddings was captured?
Cash Patel.
So if you're
don't give him credit. Come on.
I'm just saying who's announced it. I'm not giving anybody credit. I'm just saying who announced it, right? Look, he was the messenger. I'm not disputing that. But,
one eye hunting, one eye fishing.
But, it was the FBI, right? Again, if you're the DEA, then why are you here? And I think that there's going to be a lot of that interagency thing. Look, DEA does great things and they do it, but this always has been viewed as a DEA. What I'm trying to get, I'm not trying to attack the DEA. That's not what I'm getting.
No, I understand.
But it's like now specifically with the Trump administration, I think the before and after, if there's one thing that's going to change is this component of U.S. national security and foreign policy, where this is going to be the primary aspect of U.S. law enforcement, intelligence, and military. Is going to be this counter cartel fight, right? Is going to be this drug trafficking fight. This shield of America, you can blast it as bravado. Fine. I'm not disputing that. Obviously now, Kristi Noem, the former Homeland Security Secretary, who's now the head of, Shield of America, we can say what we want. But do not underestimate the influence it's gaining with a lot of Latin American countries, who then is going to turn that into, well, we don't want China, for example, to be your main economic partner. We don't want them to control this port. We don't want them to control this. Because, for example, Ecuador.
I'm down with that. Yeah.
President Noboa, he is all let's go.
Yep.
And to be honest, he has a lot of the popular backing for people to be like, yeah, we view cartels as, and these gang members, los lobos y los choneros being the two main ones that are foreign terrorist organizations declared by the U.S. He has the support of the Ecuadorian people to heavy rule because they're done.
Dude, yeah, Luis Navia was telling me about this over 2 years ago now. Pounding the table, was like, bro, you got to look at fucking Ecuador. Yeah. I'm here right now, brother. It's crazy. And the more I hear from, just like around the edges, guys like you, like talking about this, there's a lot fucking going, and no one talks about it at length. But
so here's the reason why. Here's the reason why. I'll give you a down and dirty of why. So there's multiple games, but the two ones are Los Lobos y Los Choneros. Los Lobos have an alliance with CJNG, Los Choneros with the Sinaloa cartels, right? And so that's why I was saying that's proxy fight. So Ecuador's the one area where you can say the extension of the Mexican cartel wars is kind of continuing with the Lobos y los Choneros. The reason why it's so important is because Ecuador, the Pacific route in the drug trafficking, accounts for 70 to 80% of the drugs that reach the United States. It's the Pacific. 70 to 80% of it's assessed 70 to 80% of the drugs that reach the United States come from the maritime Pacific route.
Wow.
Okay. So that's why one of the specific ports in Ecuador is so important is for the drug trade is Guayaquil.
Guayaquil.
Yes.
Can we pull that up on a map? How do you spell it? Guaya.
Quil.
You got it?
No, but in Ecuador. So yeah, but go all the way. So zoom out. You can just zoom out. Go to Ecuador. Right. Down in,
left.
Left. There it is. Keep on going. That right there. You see the GUA? Keep on scrolling in. Right there. Right. That right there. You
Guayaquil?
See? Yeah, that's it. That a lot of the violence is there is astronomical, but because a lot of the drugs end up there, right? Because it's
kind of a port place.
Yeah. And so the Colombian Pacific and the Ecuador are huge for the drug trafficking route. So that's why Los Lobos y Los Choneros and other gangs the violence is there. You can't talk about, another shout out to Jeff, you can't talk about Ecuador without talking about the Albanian mafia. They're huge.
Oh, yeah.
They're huge in there.
Yeah.
And so, but a lot of international groups there. So because when you're looking at the drug trade and organized crime, for example, a lot of the things when people said, they said, Maduro was involved in the drug trade. And then they would say, Venezuela and the Caribbean route only accounts for 8% of the drugs. It's like, okay, what you're focusing on is the export-import, right? Where does it leave from and how does it get to the U.S., right? Or granted, Venezuela from a drug trade perspective was much more heavily to Europe than to the U.S., right? If that's the European route.
Right.
But you're mixing, you're focusing on the wrong thing. Because by that logic, then Mexican cartels aren't responsible for any drugs reaching the U.S. If you're going to use a drug trade route, well, it's really just Ecuador. So we should just bomb and seize Ecuador. But that's not how these organizations operate from. They're like the managers. They're like the company.
Yeah.
They're the ones that manage everything.
Storefront.
The planning and getting it, processing it, getting either directly through networks they control or third-party networks that they pay and manage to get it to where they need to go. And
they're UPS.
I always say, what's a cartel? Think of Amazon and Blackwater merged into one.
Ooh, that's good.
That's my comparison for Mexican cartels.
Bezos and Prince. What a combo.
And then when it gets to the U.S., it's like the maritime, like Maersk, like the maritime ship. Like all they care about is getting the drug to a destination in the U.S. Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Atlanta, Tulsa, Oklahoma, for all they care. But once it reaches to a certain point in the U.S., the Sinaloa cartel, the CJNG, or the Mexican cartel is like, all right, to the local gangs or organized crimes.
Your
or the
problem now.
Here's the drugs. You sell it to the Americans. We are out. That's why there was a great report from the Boston Globe where the DEA said they detained dozens of Sinaloa cartel operators in a major drug bust in the Northeast, right, in Massachusetts and Maine. And it was like, not a single one of them was that was just a press statement. It was a lie. Like, not a single one of them was to call to cartel members. They just traffic cocaine and like sell drugs to the people. But like, you're not. That's it.
Yeah, the DEA said it arrested 171 high-ranking Sinaloa cartel members. A spotlight investigation found that's not true. We're gonna Mike Benz it real quick. You ever see this trick?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're an OSINT. You gotta know this.
Of course you do.
Yeah, this was so cool when Benzie showed us this.
There's another one. If Archive doesn't work, the other one is I don't know if you want to say that, but removepaywall.com.
Yeah, we can say. What are they gonna do about it? All right, so let's go down a little bit. All right. President Trump's escalating war against Latin America cartels crashed into this leafy old mill town with surprising force one morning in late August when heavily armed federal agents and local police kicked off a series of raids by tossing a flashbang grenade and bashing in a door. The show of force was followed by an announcement from Fed authorities that in coordinated raids across New England, they had seized more than 500 pounds of drugs and captured nearly 200 members of Mexico's notorious Sinaloa cartel, the violent syndicate that supplies illegal drugs to the U.S. The special agent in charge of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration's New England Division, Jared Forget, said, unfortunate name, said the crackdown led to 171 cartel member arrests across the region, including 27 in Franklin. The DEA didn't name any of the suspects because they forgot them, but Forget described that as a high-level arrest. They were part of a national sweep that netted more than 600 operatives of the feared organization over 5 days.
So here's one of my favorite quotes. I'm going to say, scroll down. Let me see if I can find it. Hold on.
We're the DEA. We're not going after low-level retail drug traffickers, Forget told the interviewer at the time.
Here, scroll down. It's from the father of one of them.
The father? Okay, so I can guarantee that he's not part of the Sinaloa cartel, Scott Alady said of his son Tyler, very Spanish name there, who was charged in state court in Franklin with a felony-level drug sale and immediately released without having to post bail. He isn't a high-ranking member of anything. He's high-ranking dumb. Yeah, W for the dad on
that. That was one of my friends. So why do I show this article, right? I mean, because it goes back to this idea of how do cartels operate. Like, for example, when we're talking, why weren't the cartels able to seize the illegal marijuana trade in the U.S.? Because that's not what they're here for. They don't, you're not, and anybody, if you go to the street and somebody says, oh, I'm selling cocaine directly to somebody, it's like, oh, I work for the Sinaloa cartel. No, you don't. Shut up. That's not how this works. Hell, you're not even going to find that in Mexico, man. It's actually one of the things that actually happens in Mexico. They're very protective of their brand. Mm-hmm. If you start throwing that you're like,
you're done.
You're done.
Yeah.
And if you're not, they'll dismember you, record it, and share it.
They'll send it to your family in multiple boxes.
In the U.S., that's what they're wholesale. Get all the drugs in one area, and then you figure it out.
Yeah,
that's the business. And because what is a cartel? You know, one of my favorite scenes in Sicario 2 is when they cross the border, and you remember there was that van, and they're trying to cross the border, and it's very ominous, and then the dude opens it, and it's just a mom with a child. It's like, oh, it's good money, and I bring my child because nobody thinks anything about it. It's like, yes. What is a cartel member in the U.S.? Lawyers, businessmen, accountants.
Yep.
How do you, make fraudulent documents, cash businesses? That's what they are. Yes, there's sicarios here, sure. That's not the majority of them. Why? They're not here to shoot people up. They're here to make money. So you need to have an operation inside of the United States capable of making tens of billions of dollars yearly, either from drug trade, or here's another one where specifically the Jalisco New Generation Cartel probably makes at least $1 billion a year, if not more, selling stolen Mexican oil. And there was indictments in Texas from families who were buying Mexican oil from Primito.
Wasn't there Utah as well?
Yeah. So, for example, one of the sanctions, actually, if you scroll out and go back to Mexico, I'll show you. So this guy, Primito, so scroll in and northeast by Brownsville, Texas. Okay, so scroll a little bit more in. So the light blue, click on the light blue. So that's metros, right? The Metros. The guy here, the leader is Primito. So the Gulf Cartel had a civil war, and so there's two groups. It's that light blue, and then the dark blue, that is Grupo Scorpion, the Scorpion group, right? So those are the two. The black, we said, is a different cartel, was the Northeast Cartel. The red underneath that is is called Old School Zetas, right? So those are the three groups in the Zetas Viejas Escuelas, Metros, and Grupo Scorpion. Metros and Grupo Scorpion are two factions of the Gulf Cartel. But in reality, the Metros now should be considered, instead of a faction of the Gulf Cartel, they're basically CJNG in Tamaulipas, right? And leader Primito has he had very deep personal relationship with El Mencho, which one of the questions for me was, when El Mencho was killed, what happens to Primito? What happens to his influence within the organization? Because although he wasn't part on paper of the leadership, that was El Jardinero before. El Jardinero was El Jardinero, El Chapo, 03 y R were the top four. El Primito had a lot of personal relationship with El Mencho. So now that El Mencho is killed and now El Mencho's stepson 03 took over, what happens to Primito? But Primito was sanctioned by OFAC because he was heavily involved in this of selling stolen oil into Texas. And some of those indictments in Texas was because of him. And so he's key. So they have, you see that red line, they have an alliance with the Old School Zetas, and they used to be fighting for years against Scorpion Group. But in February 2025, shortly after Trump assumed office, Metros and Scorpion Group declared a ceasefire because the violence was getting out of hand. Actually, an American citizen died from an IED in Tamaulipas because of the war in 2025, I believe in February or late January. And so the Mexican government and the Tamaulipas state government kind of went to the Metros and Scorpion Groups. Can you guys stop?
Yeah.
This is getting out of hand. You guys need to stop.
You talked earlier about your time interfacing with, I forget the specific group, but with elements of the Mexican military and how great these guys were.
MPs, the military.
And talented and trying to go after the cartels and all that. So we're not talking about in the factions you're working with people that are, secretly on the take from the cartel and stuff like that. These are guys that are going after it. That said, all different elements of the government or other parts of the military and things like that, we see it over and over again. They're actually just working with the cartels. So it's kind of like whack-a-mole all the time because you got your groups of good guys who are trying to stop shit. They go stop something and then something happens on the other side and now they got to go try to stop that because their other guys are on the inside making that happen. How possible is it to really get it? Like, we've been looking at this map all day. It's like fucking Game of Thrones, except it's not the government. It's all a bunch of fucking cartels.
The government is the government. Here, scroll out. Just 1 second. Just scroll out. I'll go scroll down. Keep on going down. Like mid-Mexico. Zoom in on mid-Mexico. You see that, like, go left a little bit? That yellowish again?
Yeah.
Click one of there. Okay, let me see.
Isn't this where Dave Frank was shooting it out? Dave? It's pretty fucking similar, right?
Wait, no. Where's Los Reyes? Scroll in there. Is this La Resistencia? I'm trying to find. Where's Los Reyes? No, because that's Knights Templar. It should be around here. Oh, right here. Scroll there. That's why I couldn't see it. It's right here. So, okay, right there. Let me go there. Okay. I was like, I knew it was there. Like, there it is. Okay. So that's called Los Reyes, Michoacán. Los Reyes, so that's loosely part of what's called the United Cartel, Carteles Unidos. The United Cartels has various different groups. One of the group is called Los Reyes, and this guy specifically, the leader, that is called R5, R5. There's Mexican military bases there, right, like in that town, Los Reyes. Guess who they work for? That guy.
Yeah, I was going to say, they got to be on.
Like, even CJNG is like, you guys work for these guys, so we're going to go mess you up. And CJNG in Zacatecas, they have a front called Fuerza Zacatecas Nueva Generación. They've been blasting the Zacatecas State Police, specifically the FRIZ, F-R-I-Z, and a former, and actually funny enough, they were blasting a general. He was in charge of the 11th military zone of Mexico, the Mexican Army, in Zacatecas. They were blasted for being on Mayo's payroll. They actually released a statement that I kind of made a tweet about it. It's like, hey, this specific Mexican general, they've been blasting for being on the payroll of the Mayos. And like 2 days ago, I found out he got relieved of command. I was like, oh, I wonder if that had to do with anything or, but
maybe.
But they were like blasting. And so, but to your point, why was Governor Rocha, right, the former governor of Sinaloa who just resigned, indicted? Because he was with Los Chapitos. So when the Sinaloa cartel civil war happened, you had a situation where the Mexican federal government clearly was supporting the Mayos. Like, undisputable, like, it was clear as day. The Mexican military was helping the Mayos. And now you run into an issue where the state police and even the municipal police had a long history of working with Los Chapitos.
It's just like it's a clusterfuck.
Actually, here's a clusterfuck. Look up. I'm like, I'll go. Look this guy up. General, and then it's Cienfuegos. It's CIEN. And so for people, when you notice me speak, sorry, I used to live in Spain for 7 years. So the way I learned Spanish is the Ceceo.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, do me a favor.
Barcelona.
Put New York Times on the Google with that. Like that. Let's see.
Uh-huh. We'll archive
that.
Cienfuegos affair,
dude.
That's a hard
read
name.
This. And I mean, it's a long article. Don't get me wrong.
Whoever made Narcos, like, I hope you listen to a lot of podcasts like this because the material, bro. All right, the Cienfuegos affair. Inside the case that upended the drug war in Mexico. A Times Magazine ProPublica investigation reveals how the U.S. painstakingly built a case against a Mexican general suspected of links to OC and then decided to let him go. All right, let's read a little bit of this. So, when the Cienfuegos family landed at Los Angeles International Airport on October 15, 2020, they looked excited and maybe a bit relieved. With the pandemic still ravaging Mexico, they had come to vacation in Southern California. Arranging such a visit wasn't a problem, even on short notice. The patriarch, retired General Salvatore Cienfuegos Cepeda, had made powerful American friends during his 6 years as Mexico's defense minister. When he needed a favor, like visas for his wife, daughters, and granddaughters, he could call someone at the Pentagon or the CIA. But as the family approached the passport line, an immigration officer waved them to the side. A trim middle-aged man, dressed like the general in a blue blazer and jeans, stepped forward and introduced himself in Spanish as a special agent of the Drug Enforcement Administration. Could he speak with the general privately, he asked. The two men crowded into a small office with several other law enforcement officers. There is a warrant for your arrest, sir, the agent said. This is a copy of the indictment against you. Cienfuegos wore a face mask with a clear plastic shield over it, but there was no hiding the confusion and anger. There must be some mistake, he insisted. Do you know? Oh, he hit him with the, do you know who I am? The agents did. For years, U.S. law enforcement and intelligence agencies had been watching Cienfuegos as he rose through the Mexican army to become defense minister in 2012. Since late 2015, the DEA had been investigating what it believed were Cienfuegos' corrupt dealings with a second-tier drug gang based in the small Pacific Coast state, Nayarit. In 2019, he had been secretly indicted on drug conspiracy charges by a federal grand jury in Brooklyn. I have worked with your CIA, Cienfuegos protested. I have been honored by your Department of Defense. I understand, the DEA agent said, but you have still been charged. In the tumultuous days before the 2020 election, with COVID cases surging, President Donald Trump brainstorming and Senate Republicans rushing in to confirm a Supreme Court justice, the jailing of a retired Mexican general didn't make the front pages, even in Los Angeles. It did make headlines in Mexico City. But President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador of Mexico, who had long promised to vanquish the country's deeply rooted corruption, seemed to take the news in stride. It is a very regrettable fact that a former defense secretary should be arrested on charges of having ties to drug trafficking, he said the next morning. We must continue to insist, and hopefully this helps us understand that the main problem in Mexico is corruption. The U.S. law enforcement agencies had gone after Mexican officials before, yada, yada, yada. Cienfuegos, though, was the most consequential Mexican official ever charged in U.S. court. Nearly 2 years into his retirement, he remained unusually influential, having groomed a generation of army leaders. And I'm remembering this case now. Whatever became of this?
So AMLO, after that, threw a fit.
Yeah.
And so the U.S. just said, okay, we'll let him go if you guys investigate and then charge him. And the Mexicans like, yeah, we'll investigate. And they let him go. That's why now I think this is where I think now in the second Trump administration, they're like, oh, hell no. Yeah. We're not going to do whatever. You're not going that. Read this article. Like it's because the reason why I bring this up, though, is to your point, because I think a lot of people, which is true, right? When we're talking about, it's like, oh, the cartels corrupt the government, which is true. But this case actually shows the other way around. And there's a great description here in which they're going after one of the leaders, and he sends in the special forces to go after them. And when the cartel leader surrenders, he says, I'm Cienfuegos' guy. I'm Cienfuegos' guy. What are you doing? And the Mexican special forces then just execute him on the spot based on this indictment.
Whoa.
And
some south of the border justice right there.
And it's like, I think, you know what, I can probably, if I remember, you can, because there's a whole history where he lays it down. I think it was BLO, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was H2, who they were specifically in the opera. Do this, Control F, and then put H2. Is there any? No, it's not H2. Who was it?
Interesting.
Hold on.
The four brothers were key figures. H2 was a. Oh, it's got a dash. That's why. So it says H2 was a volatile, moon-faced, scarcely known outside of the regional underworld. Growing up on the outskirts of Mazatlan, the Sinaloa beach city, he became a sicario, or hitman, for the Mazatlacos, a local gang closely affiliated with the Beltrons, and later emerged as a lieutenant to Hector Beltran. After the Capo's arrest, H2 and his men were like orphans, a former Mexican official told me. H2 gathered his forces in Nayarit, a state wedged among the narco strongholds of Sinaloa, Durango, and Jalisco. He procured opium gum from Nayarit's eastern highlands and used BLO connections to ship heroin and other drugs into the United States. As far as Beck and his team could tell, the H's seemed to have no trouble with the Nayarit authorities. The task force acted cautiously on what it learned. The agents seized one big drug shipment, but held back on actions that might jeopardize their surveillance. They sensed that they were onto an unusually good case. The H's were moving a lot of drugs and killing a lot of people. They were also careless in their communications. Even their dirty calls, those in which they discussed criminal activities, were rarely hard to decipher.
There's actually the video of the raid is out there, which is the Black Hawk flying and shooting with the minigun. It's the first, there's one from Ovidio Guzman that people mistook because there was a similar one, which was this guy. And I said, you can even maybe put, the flashy, who's like, his hands up. Dude, I'm telling you, this report is like, because when you read this, actually, there you go. Knew that the growing. Keep on going. Keep on going.
Yeah,
keep on going.
Still a bunch.
When you read the article, the question then is, who had the power in this corrupt relationship? Was it the drug leader or was it the general? Yeah. And here you see it's the general. It's the general who has the power, and the politicians, to your point, have the power to tell the cartel, "You're going to do this. If not, we'll just kill you." So how do you solve that problem?
I don't know, because then it's like, there's like a comparison in my head I have, but it's not a perfect comparison, so I don't want to use that. But basically, like, where the buck stops, it's bad no matter what. One just has a shield and the other has a fucking, illegally purchased gun, if you will.
Yeah.
It's the same end result.
Yeah. And it's just, that's why, you look at the corruption piece, and again, I highly, highly recommend, even years ago, this article, but it's just such a good investigation, and you read it, and what it comes out of it is, was Cienfuegos the corrupt dude? I mean, was the BLO guy, H2, was he the one that controlled the general? Did the general control him? And so then how do you deal with that? Because when you're looking at this, and this is the irony of the situation when you're tracking cartels, you literally have to track, for example, the R5, El Reyes, right? Los Reyes, the Carteles Unidos. Those military bases are known to support Carteles Unidos against the Mexican, against CJNG. We have footage from Michoacan, which is where Carteles Unidos is based out of members of the Carteles Unidos, and back then, the police and even sometimes the military, fighting side by side against Jalisco New Generation cartel. So you see that happens. Yeah. So then how do you address these issues? And this is where the problem of the cartel, solving the cartels, especially where I think El Mencho, for example, and Mayo became very powerful, was in their idea of their power of corruption that they have and how they were able to influence Mexican politicians, right? They were the top of the game. That's why I do believe that reporting that El Mencho, that Claudia Sheinbaum was not aware of El Mencho's operation until it was well already on its way, right? And the vetted units were the ones that got intelligence from the U.S. to go after this guy. But the question when you're analyzing Mexico is who is corrupt, who isn't? Yeah. The assumption you should make is everybody in the Mexican political system is corrupt. And the question then becomes, are they corrupt because they're being beholden by the cartel, or do they hold the cartel hostage? And
they happen to just be our biggest trade partner and located right on our border. So it's not convenient.
We don't, and that's the thing, and this is I know we talk a lot about the drug trade, but again, you're the oil. Do you know who was heavily implicated in the oil theft and all that? Was
Mormons.
Well, it was the out in Mexico, in the Mexico side. It was the Mexican Navy. Oh. A huge corruption scandal because the Mexican Navy was heavily involved in a lot of the oil theft.
That's nice.
And so, right, and so And I think one of the models, because when you go to that map, I think one of the differences when you look at the map in comparison to, you were talking about Narcos Mexico, right? Like the first season, what was it? Like Guadalajara cartel.
Yep.
Let's send the marijuana. What has fundamentally changed back then to now?
Oh, it's not. They moved away from marijuana. They went to harder stuff.
Well, to me, it's they went away from the transactional business and they went to the territorial business. That's why we see violence go up.
Now, can you extrapolate upon that?
Yeah. So there's a great book. A good friend of mine. I talk to him regularly. He's a professor. Nathan P. Jones, great guy. And all the way back in 2016, he wrote a book. Like, if there's one thing that helped me understand Mexican cartels, and look, if we can give him a shout out, his book, it's called Mexico Illicit Networks. So Nathan P. Jones' book, you can Google it, right? And he wasn't the first one to come up with it, but he really, that one, I from 2016, right? So phenomenal book. I've cited this so many times. Like, it's one of the books that helped me really frame my understanding of Mexican cartels that had a huge influence, right? From being like, let's say, doing this as a hobby to doing a little bit more professional to where I'm at. Like, this was in his book, he makes an argument that there's basically two types of cartels. And I wrote an article about this. It's called The Militarization of Drug Cartels in Mexico. For Newsline Institute, I wrote it. I heavily cited his work on that article. And the argument is the transactional cartel is the Guadalajara cartel. We just want to get marijuana through, right? It's a business. Look, everything is a business, don't get me wrong, but it's more focused on the business model and the way they operate inside of Mexico is this transactional piece of moving drugs. And an example of that, for example, the quintessential perfect example of that is the Guadalajara cartel, right? And that's where violence wasn't so bad. There's violence, don't get me wrong, but it's not what we see now. The territorial cartel, it's a different type of model and is exemplified by the Zetas. And what it is their whole business model centers on territorial control.
Right.
And that's how they make their money, either through the drug trade, extortion, you name it, or the passing through the plazas. My argument from this, because he wrote this in 2016, is what we've seen is a transition. All the cartels, because here he kind of talks about the Sinaloa cartel and the Federation still being transactional model. My argument is they've all kind of transitioned to, at least at various degrees, but more so now, a territorial focus. Like, there's still transactional piece, the drug trade, but the territorial control model is very important within that transactional piece. So that's why what we're seeing now is a militarization of the drug cartels.
Right.
That's because the territorial model emphasizes control, emphasizes maintaining that power, and you need that militarized force to do it.
It's vertical integration, effectively. Correct. When you have acreage and real estate, you have more area to control and actually set up the stuff that's going to pay for the transactional part. I got it. Okay.
And so that's why we see the drones now being that's why I have a huge problem when I'm talking to like some think tanks and stuff like that. They're like, and sometimes how they frame it is like they frame it as, oh, it's a law enforcement problem. Oh, it's it's crime. And it's like, do you want to join me in a session of watching decapitation videos and tell me this is a crime problem?
Yeah.
This isn't. That has long passed.
Well, that's a think tank for you, sitting around in a fucking room and air conditioning, talking about things happening 1,000 miles away.
Yeah.
Where heads are getting chopped like it's just a fucking statistic. Yeah. What else is new? But in the middle of all this, because like we've been alluding to it all day and we talked about it a little bit, is the story of the year, which is the fact that El Mencho is dead. And like we were talking about, I had Kat in here 5 days after she was walking through the aftermath of what happened at his compound. And it's pretty clear that he is in fact dead, but the sketchiness of the operation and the staginess, if you will, of the scene is certainly questionable. And you have to wonder, like, what is the bigger picture here? What was really happening behind the scenes? So now we've had some time to let things settle in and more information to come out. As best as you can tell, who, like you said, Claudia Scheinbaum was not notified of this until it was underway. So who was responsible for executing this and what really happened here?
I think, it's those vetted units. If based on the Reforma report, which I do believe is true, because the question then, like, why now going after Mencho? And I think the argument could be made that if it's that Claudia Scheinbaum, let's say she authorized this, like if you're going to make the argument that she authorized this operation, she was fully aware. The argument is the reason why she do it now is because the Venezuela operation against Maduro, they're like, one of the immediate after facts of this was, oh shit, they can do this in Mexico.
Right.
We don't want that. That's the last thing we want is like Delta Force or SEAL Team 6 or drone strikes or air strikes inside of our country against drug members, right? We don't want that. So the argument then is let's go after Mencho because he's the biggest fish. He's the big guy. If we can show we can go after him, there's nobody that we can't go after. There's nobody who's untouchable. And Mencho is the untouchable one. And so you can make that argument. So I think the issue was a lot of it from like that compound and that house that he was at in Talapa. What happened was he was fleeing the area and he was executed more in the forest. I think they executed him. I mean, like I don't think they even gave him a shot to surrender.
And you don't think he was dead before?
No.
Okay.
I think that like he tried to flee
because they were saying like he was on dialysis. And
So the El Mencho story is always very interesting. That there's always was rumors before this that he was dead because of natural causes and dialysis and all that. No, I think the Mexican and the reason why we also know that this wasn't necessarily staged is, I mean, CJNG went on a warpath afterwards
for a day.
Yeah. Still, they killed what?
28? They killed a lot, but again, and I hate to say it this way, unfortunately, that's a quick statistic.
Correct. But it was still very significant. Even because I remember when we were talking earlier in this episode when they do narco blockades, and I said the exception is El Mencho because they don't necessarily do it for retaliation, they do it to enable a leader to get out. Here they did it as retaliation. That's very interesting. They killed 28 Mexican National Guard soldiers afterwards. But obviously there's an understanding in the CJNG that's we can't do this long term, right? Because a cartel is not there to replace the government.
Right.
They're not. They need the government. Again, like when they get arrested, they need the government. Like, hey, judges.
Well, if there's no government, you can't get arrested. That is the other argument.
Well, but who are they? They're not going to provide like water services to the people. Now they'll do hearts and minds, but they're not going to run like the normal day-to-day government bureaucracy. That
CJNG brought to you by the fucking cartel.
Exactly. Yeah. Sponsored by CJNG. How that was in the soccer games, but But for Mencho, right, when he was killed, the question then became, okay, who's going to take over? Because the fact that his death is what caused all this violence to occur throughout Mexico, because it literally happened in every single state that CJNG controlled, right? And one of the arguments, for example, Primito, how you can say he's CJNG, because his territory in Reynosa, Tamaulipas, also had narco blockades as a response. So then the question then became, because I do believe he was executed, who was going to take over? And there was really 3, maybe 4 contenders. It was number 1 was always going to be 03, his stepson, who's an American citizen. Yeah, Vincent Santana. And what's very interesting about him is he comes from Los Queenies. Los Queenies family, the Gonzalez Valencia family, which they're the money holders.
Yep.
Right. So you had 03, who was the stepson. You had El Jardinero, El Chapo, and then maybe Doble R, right? Who's the guy from Guanajuato. It really was going to be 03. If you were going to put me a gun to my head and say who are the top 3 contenders, I was going to say 03, and then I was going to have a hard time if either El Jardinero or El Chapo. El Jardinero, if there's one man who can break CJNG and cause like a Sinaloa cartel civil war and break off and do his own thing, is El Jardinero.
Yeah.
Right? Not El Chapo. El Chapo won't do that. El Jardinero, I can see that.
Why do you say that with him?
His rise was very significant, very pronounced, and very, very well documented. And what was interesting is under him, he formed a very strong lieutenant named El Serio. And that guy was starting to spread. He was in Guerrero, and then he was in Morelos. Because Jardinero's base of operation was Nayarit and Jalisco, and then you had after the Chapito CJNG alliance, then he sent his guys to Sinaloa. And then he had his top lieutenant expand in Guerrero and Morales. Okay, holy shit, that's a lot of places.
That's a lot.
Right, and you can tell that he was an ambitious man. And there was conversations after Mencho was killed would Jardinero accept anybody but him? Well, I got a source, I think like less than a day after Mencho was killed, a source of mine within CJNG told me like, no, it's 03. He's the leader. He's the new leader. We're all understanding that he's the new leader of Jalisco New Generation Cartel.
You text him like, who's the leader, fam?
Yeah, literally. I was like, yo, man. Like, who is it? I have a tweet.
Congratulations.
You could look up on X, like I literally tweeted it, like the first one. And it was funny because after I tweeted it, like everybody apparently literally like copied and pasted kind of my tweet. We're like, so everybody has CJNG sources? Like,
yeah, you got to be able to watermark the tweet of the tweet.
Because I told him, and it's from somebody that is reliable. I know, and he knows the inner workings of CJNG pretty well. Actually, he gave me a tip before the CJNG Chapitos video was coming out that they formally announced the alliance. He said, hey, there's a video coming out later today announcing this alliance. Be able to look at it. Like 6 hours later is when I saw it. So that's
why does he want to tell you that?
Because I think because then it's like an influence game, because then if I share his content, it's kind of like in a way where he can be like, see, I'm also important and influential within the organization. It's kind of, you just got to do it. And, but at the many aspects, cartel members, but just like anybody, like why do you have sources that pass you information?
Right.
Just sometimes I'm not going to question it. I just have to validate it.
Yeah.
And so when O3 was announced as the leader, it was very interesting. There does appear to be an agreement. But again, the capture of Jardinero was like, I mean, I know they're after him. Maybe the U.S. was going after him. The Mexico was obviously going after him. He was a priority target. But was there like some additional intel that came out from a source that were like, we don't want to deal with CG. We don't want to deal with El Jardinero. We don't want to deal with him breaking off and doing his own thing.
Right.
And so that was a very interesting dynamic. But, the key thing about Jalisco New Generation Cartel now is that the leader of it, O3, comes from Los Queenies. And what's important about the Queenie, when I say we're going to control the money, I don't think people understand what I mean by that. They control the money.
Yeah, please explain. It's like the Rockefellers.
If you were to grab every single Mexican peso and dollar that the Queenies have ever touched in Mexico, and you were to remove it out of the Mexican financial system,
bye-bye.
The Mexican economy collapses overnight.
Yep.
There's a reason why when people say, go after the money, it's like, easier said that. Look at the sanctions that the U.S. has imposed on Mexican financial institutions. I think the total value is less than $15 billion. That's a joke. We're not going to go after the actual finance, all of them. We can't. We collapse the Mexican. And to your point, they're our largest trading partner.
That's right.
We're not going to do that.
Fucks us up.
We're not. No, it's insane. Like, wake up, people. Go after the money. It's easier said than done. You cannot touch the Queenie's money that well. And El Queenie is sitting in U.S. prison, right? But that family has always controlled the money. And so now the stepson, the reason why El Mencho is probably as powerful as he is because of El Queenie's mom, his wife, who comes from that family. And now the interesting aspect, the CJNG is now under so the guy, El Mencho controlled the guns and the Queenies controlled the money. El Mencho was always the top dog, don't get me wrong. He wasn't necessarily running the day-to-day. That was actually more O3. He was the one who was running the day-to-day. I mean, that's the suspicion. But there was an interesting dynamic, which is, was he losing influence to El Jardinero, for example, or even El Chapo, that they can challenge him? Clearly not. But now we have CJNG, the guy who controls the gun and the guy who controls the money is the same person. It's the same family now.
So now would you say they're in a healthy position as a cartel organization post El Mencho? They've gone through the hardest days of like a post leadership change at this point?
I think the worst case scenario is already past them. I think the Jardinero aspect is very interesting. The fact that after El Jardinero was captured, another CJNG, the source of mine from CJNG told me El Serio and another guy, one of his cousins, but really El Serio took control of El Jardinero's overall faction. So he's now in charge, but he's not at the level of El Jardinero, right? There's no dispute that he's not at the same level. And so I think those are the aspects. I know we were talking this off air, like the El Yogur. Like people were, it's like, okay, because after
he was fun too.
He was, he's still active. He's very active. So it's very funny because I remember saying El Yogur caught my attention because he's always was based out of Michoacan. After Mencho was captured for I think it started as a joke and people ran with it that he was going to be the new leader. CJ is like, no, ladies and gentlemen, no, he's not. He's not even top 10 most powerful in Mexico, right? El Tío Laco, another name in Michoacan, is more influential than El Yogur. But what's very interesting about El Yogur is he started out in Michoacan and then he expanded his operations in Quintana Roo and Cozumel, which is like the opposite coast. Like, wait, Michoacan, Quintana Roo, Cozumel, Cancun. Okay, that's interesting. Like way out there, right? Generally, how factions work, they're connected. Then there was reporting that he also had a base of operation in Colima. Okay, Colima, Michoacán, that makes sense. Sure, Cozumel, that's interesting. When shortly after the Chapito Alliance was announced and Jardinero went in, and I actually remember talking this in another episode, and Jardinero went in, one of the things I started to notice was, is this a situation where Jardinero is getting too much power? Because he not only does he control Nayarit and Jalisco, and now through his subordinates, Guerrero and now possibly even Morelos later on, but now he's active in Sinaloa with Los Chapitos. What was interesting, there was reporting from accounts based on Michoacán that El Yogurt was sent to Sinaloa. And what caught my attention was, I kind of speculated, did they do that because they didn't want Jardinero to be the only one that controls the whole Sinaloa cartel civil war fight? So they put somebody else in there to be like, yeah, we're fighting, we're both Jalisco Generation Cartel, but it's like, hey, Yogurt, no, you're also going to be very active.
Right.
And some of the reporting I got is that his fighters were actually concentrated in Culiacán. One of his factions I think it's called the 17. They're very much centered in Culiacán, which is the capital. Like that's the Chapitos heartland. And so it's kind of like this, almost like you can make this argument like this Praetorian Guard in a way, but in a way to tell the Jardinero guys like, no, we're here. What's interesting about Yogurt though is that him and Primito, the other guy was saying, hate each other, despise each other. And I think the reason is...
So their factions obviously hate each other too.
I mean, obviously I'm not going to say it vocally on Instagram. I think from a leadership, and I think the reason why is because I think Yogurt, again, who's not in the contender of the top leader, I think the interesting aspect is Primito's influence within Jalisco Generation Cartel is that personal relationship with Mencho. But even before he was killed, they hated each other. And I think the reason why Primito hated him was because Yogurt was rising in power. But he was able to do that outside of deploying his forces. I mean, because he was deploying his forces not through personal relation. What was interesting is El Metro then deployed forces to Zacatecas to support El Chapo. And so it's all these internal cartel dynamics, specifically within Jalisco Generation Cartel, that you can see how it can get very complicated.
Right.
Is with El Mencho, it can kind of break down. But luckily for 03, it's kind of stabilized and stayed the same.
Seeing as we just saw for the first time an administration in the United States declare the cartels a terrorist threat and organization, which allows them to legally potentially do some other interesting things down there. We haven't seen an all-out war happen from the United States against these organizations there, despite the powers that they've now granted themselves. So I ask you, sitting in here in 2026 with another, I guess, 2.5 years in this administration, do you think that the abilities of the United States government that have now been temporarily at least granted to them by declaring these organizations terrorist organizations will have put a major, major damper on the power that these organizations have in Mexico by the time Trump leaves office in 2029?
If it continues as we're seeing now and the only strikes we're seeing is against these like speedboats, then no.
So in what scenario would it make a big impact?
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's like I don't want to, the reason why we do like the Kingpin strategy and the military strategy is because really it's the only tool that we have available to do, and it's to do something, and even the Mexicans do it, and they have to do it. Again, it's like, oh, go after the money. Again, easier said than done. I mean, I think from if you're analyzing this from a terrorism declaration perspective, and it's just that, then no. If you start combining that with severe targeting of Mexican corruption, now we're talking.
Which would include like some sort of sanctioning in the financial system or things of those types.
And targeting the leadership of Mexico, like the political leadership, right? But the problem in Mexico is the most effective anti-corruption body in Mexico is the Southern District of New York.
That's a long way from Mexico.
But the Mexicans aren't going to solve it. So do you force them to take that into consideration? Look, I think at the end of the day, what I would say, I think the best case scenario we can look at, and a lot of people have said this, is the best case for Mexico, it ends up like Colombia. You're not going to eliminate them, but we reduce the violence. It's manageable. Now cocaine production in Colombia is skyrocketing, causing problem, but that's obviously a thing with President Petro. But can you get a situation where maybe that's reduced? But in the situation in Colombia, it's kind of somewhat more manageable and you're really interdicting drugs, et cetera, right? I think that's the best case that you can look at for Mexico. Is the military the conduit to do it? Look, the Mexicans are doing, the Ecuadorians are doing, the Colombians do it. Everybody does it. Everybody uses the military to go after it. In many aspects, you do have to go out. You have to utilize the military because Mexican cartels, the last estimate we have, control at least fully control 33% of Mexico's under cartel, absolute control. That's just like them controlling the territory. No government, no nothing. They control a third of Mexico. Now let's expand that with strong influence, where you see gunmen of cartel members side by side with the police.
Yeah, good luck.
And so you can look at it in a sense like, okay, now again, the drug strikes against drug boats. I don't think it's necessarily going to dampen. What you're going to encourage is, I think, what we saw in Spain. That's with now they're going to put in container vessels. We've already started to see that as well. So it causes problem, but you can weaken it. Can it be done in 2 years? That's, for me, is kind of hard to see. Mm-hmm. Is it possible? Sure, but just as the Mexican cartels kind of took over the Colombian cartels, if you want to say who I think might take over if the Mexican cartels weaken from a global international perspective, is the Brazilian gangs.
Oh, we can't even touch that right now, dude. We're 3 hours, 10 minutes in, but that's for the next one. 'Cause that's the Brazilian gangs are no fucking joke, man.
Finally, the Wall Street Journal, because I've been screaming this through the top of my lungs for a long time. The Wall Street Journal wrote a great article about that, about specifically PCC, but PCC and Red Commando are the two ones that I would be looking at that can, just as Sinaloa Cartel and CJNG are not only the most powerful Mexican drug cartels in Mexico, they're the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. If they start getting weakened, the ones that I would be looking at are the Brazilian gangs led by those two. Those are the two, yeah.
That's a whole different ball game right there. Stefano, you're awesome, man. You're a great follow on X. I would say Twitter, but X as well. And anything else you want linked down there, let me know so that people can find you wherever you are. But we're going to have to do this again, my friend.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was great.
All right. Everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Peace.
What's up, guys? Thanks so much for watching the video. If you have not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button before you leave, as well as leaving a like on the video. It's a huge help. You can join my Patreon via the link in the description, and you can also join my clipping community via the Discord link down below. See you for the next episode.